Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining this online swine seminar focusing on young early nutrition, the young piglets. And you are attendants from all over the world, and we are happy that so many people are attending. We have more than 1,100 people from 66 countries attending this conference. And I'm here in the studio in Amsterdam. My name is Hartog. I'm the R&D director in Nutreco and part-time professor in Wageningen University. And I'm your host today. And together with me here is Saskia Korink. Saskia is the CEO of Trouw Nutrition. And I'm very happy, Saskia, that you are here in the studio. And we will hear your thoughts about the company, about the future. We will come back to you. We have a very nice program. After interviewing Saskia, we have speakers. The first speaker is John Pluske, all the way from Australia. Thereafter, we have Chantal Farmer. She is from Canada. And we have two people from Belgium, Dominiek Maes, and we have Ruben Decaluwe. And I will introduce them later on in the program in more detail. The aim of this conference is to hear about the latest, newest scientific insight. And not only what is now the science, but also how can we use it in practice. So the translation, the application, that the farmers, that our customers can use it in the daily business. So really a very nice program for the coming 3 hours. You can ask questions by the chat. You can do it in English and you can do it in Spanish. And we also have poll questions. But before I go to the poll question, we will have a small video.
The future is unpredictable, and now more so than ever before. Dealing with uncertainty calls for resilience, adaptability, creativity, and knowledge. Facts are reflecting how the world around is changing and how we are responding to this change. No doubt this has added complexity to the industry as a whole. However, in the pig business, it has never been easy. Not only because of the uncertainties in the market, but also because pigs are not simple machines. They are complex living beings. Pig production requires finding the way through the animal's biological labyrinth day in, day out. If we are to improve the state of our business and prepare for the future, we have to make choices again and again. The right choices. Science is key to guiding those choices. It shows us what works and what doesn't. It allows us to create the best circumstances and take the best decisions. It shows us how a lifetime of sustainable health and strong performance can be assured by taking the right measures in the crucial early life period. From conception to the 70-day-old milepost, it is this period that determines your business success. LifeStart Swine, a Trouw nutrition knowledge platform, aims to make the most of this formative period. It combines scientific insights and real-life experiences into a holistic approach, educated to improve animal health, leading to higher farm performance and optimal business profitability. A platform where both profitability and sustainability play a crucial role to ensure the future of your business. A future where scientific theory and daily practice meet and interact. LifeStart Swine Online Conference marks the beginning of our journey towards better on-farm decisions and resilient and strong pig farm businesses.
So we have the first poll question. And the first poll question is, what, in your opinion, would be a leading driver of change that will shape the future of the swine industry? Is it A, a focus on sustainability? 2, evolving new agricultural technology, like smart farming? 3, disease control? 4, trading limitations and regulations? So focus on sustainability, new technology, disease control, and limitations and regulations trading. Please give your answers and we will come back just before John Pluske starts his presentation. Now, Saskia, we go over and to hear your thoughts. I think when we look back and also today, nowadays, we are in a very challenging time with Corona and which impact maybe the business because no traveling, also to get the products on the right time in the right place. How does it influence your daily business? How can you keep the spirit in your team? How can you approach the customers? Please share us your experience and your thoughts.
Yeah, well, thank you. First off, thanks for having me here. Very exciting to be part of this. But yeah, no, definitely, that's the key question today, right? I mean, how do we keep business running while COVID is still there? And honestly, I think we have worked really hard to make sure that we keep our people safe. I think that was our primary, first objective, especially because you have to change the conditions, routines. People cannot go to their normal workplace the way we used to go, so we have to deal with that. Also in the office, of course. Well, the office is basically now a home office. It still is a home office in many places, so definitely lots of changes. Also, many people absent, so increasing costs because of that, of course. And then, then the next priority were our customers, right? We really wanted to focus on our customers, making sure that we develop different ways to interact with our customers, because clearly nobody was waiting for any of our people to come on farm or to come visit them. So that's it's been interesting, right? Because you discover all kinds of new ways, and actually you learn that you can do business in a virtual way. We've been in it now for what, a year? Business is still there. Our customers are also still there. Thank you. So I think we have been able to do that. I think we've learned to be agile, creative in how we go about it. The video talks about resilience. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Also, a very key word. So all that, but I mean, it is what it is, and I think if we look, towards the future, I'm confident. Especially now that we're sort of coming to the end of this whole pandemic, hopefully. I'm confident that things will be picking up and that we can continue on our purpose of feeding the future.
Yeah, it's good to hear that the positive spirit is there and that the business is going on. Because, I can imagine you have new colleagues, new employees, and you have never met them physically.
Well, that is the strangest thing. Yes, that is the strangest thing. But it is, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. But so you talked about the future. If we talk about the future of swine production, the swine industry, there's a lot going on. We talk about Corona, but you can also think about African swine fever. How can Trouw Nutrition contribute to the future of the swine production?
Yeah, well, clearly we talk about viral diseases. That's something that the swine industry knows all about. Year on year, they have to deal with ASF, PED, what have you. I mean, you know better than me. And those viruses, they're very costly, right? They're costly to combat, but they're also very devastating impact on the productivity of our customers, but actually of the whole supply chain. So obviously, we would like to support our customers, with these type of issues. In fact, any unmet needs we would like to develop solutions for, of course. We do want to do that, however, in a balanced way, right? Mm-hmm. And that means that we would like to address disease challenges, but also advance on digital solutions, use technology for science-based decision making, for instance. So a broader scope focus. Addressing disease challenges we can definitely do via early life, and we will spend the next 3 hours talking about early life. But we also want to explore other areas. I mean, we talk about the hyperprolific sows, for instance, which generates a whole set of new challenges, right? Advancing still in feed conversion. But also using or unlocking maybe the power of nutrition to also reduce the infections, right, amongst these animals. I mean, this is very key if you think about AMR, for instance, antimicrobial resistance, right? So if we can do anything without using antibiotics, we're contributing to a super big challenge, not only for the animals, but also for human life.
Yeah, so you're in the heart of the business because nutrition is important. It's for the quality of product, for the environment, for health, what you say.
Yeah.
So, but if we focus a little bit more on the topic of today, the young animal.
Yes.
The young animal extremely important because that's the basis for later life, and it's one of the spearheads of Trouw Nutrition. So, can you tell us a little bit more about early life and what the plans are for the future?
Sure thing. I mean, I'm not a scientist, as you know, but I do. We do know that research shows that the animal's early life can significantly impact the animal's later life, right? Yeah. Their health, their life, and also their performance. So there's lots of evidence that small improvements in the early life can change, for instance, the immune system of the animals, can modulate biological processes, and in effect help these animals to become more resilient, more efficient, more sustainable, and eventually more profitable, right? Which is, I believe, everything that our customers would like. And then, we would like to really understand what the mode of actions is of our products, of our solutions. So we have invested in microbiota R&D, right, to really understand how that plays a role.
The mode of action,
How that plays a role, exactly. And we know that nutrition can influence that profile. So we can advance our development in that area. We've also invested in a new swine health and nutrition unit, right? We've actually just opened that a few months ago. So again, there we can do further studies because we can simulate very specific conditions, health conditions, but also environmental conditions. So I think that's a very exciting opportunity as well. And then lastly, we collaborate with many, many institutes around the world, about 100, I think, all around the globe. So again, in the area of development, but also when we want to validate our solutions, we can turn to these partners as well. Yep. So all in all, I'm very inspired by all this science that we can turn into fantastic innovations.
But that sounds great. So you are investing a lot in the research, you are investing in the facilities, what you say, and you're investing in validation and collaboration with others.
Absolutely.
So that is a bright future. And then you have the best practices all around the world, which you can use.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Good to hear, Saskia. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts in this, I would say, very special time where we live in. But
well, at least we're here in person together.
Exactly. But you have a clear plan for the future to help our customers in this time.
We will.
Thank you for being with us and for giving your thoughts and answering the questions, Saskia. All the best.
Very welcome. Thank you.
Okay, we go on with the program, and we have our first speaker, which is Professor John Pluske. John is all the way from Australia, the University of Melbourne. And John, you are for decades working in swine research, and we have collaboration also for that long period. And you were before also on conferences of Trouw Nutrition, where you shared your thoughts. So we are very happy now, even if you cannot be in person, that you're here online. And I know that now it's already quite late in Australia, but you were willing to be there in person, and thank you for that. John, I will first come back with the poll questions, and we have here the results, what were the leading drivers for the future, and 43% says it is focus on sustainability, 24% says it is new agriculture technologies, 23% disease control, and 10% trading limitation and regulation. John, what would be your answer, and what is your reaction on the outcome of the poll?
Well, first, thank you, Leo. Hello, Saskia, and thank you for the opportunity to be involved in today's event. I think the answer to the polls is, I guess, reflects some of the changing practices and nature of pork production and what we could anticipate in the future. I think in some ways, some of those responses are all linked. We talk about disease, and even though that was only 24%, there is an element of disease being linked to sustainability, of course, and that's around sustainability, for example, of antimicrobial use. So I think those answers are reflective of where perhaps many pork producing nations are in the world right at the moment.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. And the floor is yours for your presentation, A Window of Opportunity to Nourish Animal and Business Potential. John.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. And once again, thanks to Trouw for the opportunity to be involved today. My presentation today covers three major areas, a little bit, and it's been discussed already, around the current environment for pork production, some of the factors that may affect pork production in the future, and to finish with some some thoughts and some research around the role of early life in reaching the piglets' full genetic potential with effects on farm productivity and profitability. Well, as we know, the global pork industry is always volatile. There is continuously a host or a plethora of challenges, grain harvests, whether the yields are up or down, and that has an effect on feed prices, of course, foreign trade issues, supply chain issues, environmental issues, and disease challenges. And it was only 2.5 years ago that the first report of ASF in pigs in China was reported. And as the caption says, as many as 8,000 pigs have reportedly been affected with ASF. Well, 2.5 years later, and as we know, then this has spread to many pork-producing countries, and indeed now tens, if not hundreds of millions of pigs have been affected by this particular virus. And unfortunately, the appearance of new strains of African swine fever in virus, at the ASF virus in China rather, has really enforced to us that the impacts of disease are important, and it really just highlights our need to be vigilant and to ensure that biosecurity, hygiene, and also foreign trade practices are considered at all times. But I think it's the last 12 months that has taken volatility and disruption of the global pork industry to a completely new level. We now, unfortunately, as everyone is aware, in the midst of a global pandemic that was identified only 16 months ago or so. And as of this month, more than 120 million cases have been confirmed, with more than 2.7 million deaths attributed to coronavirus. And this has had huge impacts on the world. And as we're aware, it's one of the deadliest pandemics in human history. So what are some of the ongoing consequences of ASF and COVID-19 for the pork industry? Well, I think this is really an unprecedented situation. The unprecedented combination of ASF and or COVID-19, depending on which particular parts of the world you might be in, I think has irreversibly changed the dynamics of the global pork industry and business models that once existed. ASF certainly continues to impact pork production in Asia and Europe, and this has had some significant impacts on global trade flows of pork. And I just wanted to give you an example about the trade of pork, or the export of pork rather, from Europe and then Spain within Europe. The graph on the left-hand side shows total exports from Europe in tonnes of carcass weight for different years, from 2016 through to 2020, for a range of different countries: Philippines, South Korea, Hong Kong, Japan, and China. And by far and away, you can see the major exporting country for Europe is China, but then you can see this huge increase in exports in 2020 in response to the shortage of pork in China. If we look on the right-hand side, this is I've just taken this example from Spain, and this shows exports from Spain to different countries in January 2020, and then looks at the same situation 1 year later in January 2021. And I really just want to focus your attention on China. Again, the major export destination, but we can see nearly a 250% increase in pork exports from Spain to China to satisfy that demand. Some countries have really been able to take advantage of this situation. Other countries, for a whole variety of different reasons, for example, ASF in their own countries, have not been able to take advantage of this situation in China. Therefore, COVID-19 and ASF will keep affecting the supply chain. Producers, capacity in abattoirs and packing plants, exporters and importers, and consumers. And global feed prices and the pork trade will remain heavily impacted by the overall current global uncertainty and likely into the next year or two. So I thought I would just give you a little bit of a snapshot of what's happened in my country, in Australia, because as I said, not all countries have been impacted in the same ways by ASF or COVID-19. ASF has been detected in Australia, predominantly through international airport passengers and in packages and parcels, but Australia, fortunately, is ASF-free. We have no cases of ASF in the pork production system. And one of the major reasons for this is due to a dog or dogs. But the presence or the threat of ASF, particularly in countries to the north of Australia, prompted strict biosecurity protocols, particularly at airports and in distribution centres. And these sniffer dogs are very adept at sniffing pork products and pork meat products, for example, in suitcases. Ironically, the COVID-19 pandemic throughout the world, and I have to say again that Australia is very fortunate in not having the same consequences of COVID-19 as other countries, but the COVID-19 pandemic has actually substantially reduced the risk of ASF entering in Australia, essentially because of a ban on international travel. International passengers are not welcome in this country unless you have a very good reason, and that has reduced the threat of ASF coming into Australia. So what are some of the lessons I think that we can take away? Well, COVID-19 certainly has made the pork industry more acutely aware to what it has always known, and that is that there are severe negative economic and human-related impacts and supply chain constraints caused by a foreign disease incursion. Resilience, adaptation, and a willingness to change are vital business traits to possess in times of uncertainty and disruption, and we've seen this right through the supply chain. COVID-19 has had huge impacts on the way that society orders, purchases, prepares, and consumes pork and other foods, and I suspect some of those changes, such as balance between restaurant trade and home-prepared meals, ready meals, will persist into the future. But in these times, we go back to the basics of pork production: biosecurity and hygiene, husbandry and management, nutrition and immunity, and a focus on costs and revenue, because these are the underlying principles of pork production, and to stay in business, they will always need attention. And I think in that regard, what we've seen, or what we will continue to see, is reinforced attention on early life, both in utero and in the pre- and post-weaning periods of piglets, as vital components of future-proofing a pork production business, because I still believe that there are many, many opportunities to explore, such as those links, those important links between nutrition and immunity. Before touching on some of those aspects a little bit later on, I just wanted to look at some of what I believe are the mega issues or mega trends that will continue to impact pork production and profitability. So I think the top issues and on-farm practices that will continue to challenge pork producers into the future include how our food is produced and processed. It's really this notion of safe food. Consumers want to buy safe food, and I think what's happened with ASF and COVID-19, with the press and the media, consumers start to feel a little bit threatened about the provenance and about the safety of their food. Welfare and treatment of animals will always be paramount. Environmental sustainability and stewardship will continue to be of importance. And of course, reduce antibiotic use and enhanced antimicrobial stewardship. This is the age and will continue to be the age in the future of consumer empowerment. Consumers will want a greater trust and transparency in farming and farmers, a greater trust in veterinarians and processors, and all in all, a greater trust in the entire food supply chain. Essentially, they want to have some confidence that the food, and this is all foods, but includes pork, of course, is safe to buy and safe to eat. The bottom line, product or brand expectations amongst consumers will be higher, and consumers will want to increasingly feel good about their pork and food choices. We've heard a lot about sustainability in food production, and pork production is no different. So I think the pork industry will increasingly need to counteract concerns about climate change and provide evidence that the environmental footprint is being reduced, as well as being sustainable, for example, with antibiotic use. As an example, I just wanted to show you some highlights from the recent strategic plan from Australian Pork Limited. Australian Pork Limited is the peak industry body in Australia. And their recent strategic plan is centred around 5 pillars: market and product differentiation, managing volatility for viable farms, driving consumer demand, leading community social licence, and building industry shared vision. Now, I don't have time today to delve into each of these pillars in detail, but I just want to focus on this pillar here around leading community social licence. And when you drill down into that particular part of the strategic plan, it contains goals associated with climate-friendly farming and being carbon positive with zero waste by 2025. This is around a pitch to premium conscious shoppers of pork. It's about clean, sustainable production of pork and clean and sustainable supply of pork. And the estimate for these goals is that in the Australian pork industry, at least, that this has potential to add about 20% to the farm gate value of the industry. So these are very ambitious goals, but it just goes to, I guess, demonstrate that sustainability can have a business imperative. If we look at some of the trends and the environmental impacts in the Australian pork industry over the last 40 years, we also see some tremendous improvements in reducing the environmental footprint of the industry. So since 1980, there has been, on a per kilogram of pork live weight on farm basis, a decrease in greenhouse gas emission intensity, that's excluding land use and direct land use change emissions, of about 70%. If we include land use and direct land use change emissions, that decrease is about 90%. This has been associated with an 80% decrease in fresh water consumption, a decrease in fossil energy use of 42%, and about a 63% decrease in land occupation use for pork farming. These are significant improvements in reducing the environmental footprint. They're driven principally by improved herd productivity, changes in housing and manure management, and especially the latter, some very significant improvements in how effluent is managed and controlled, and also improvements in feed production systems. And certainly improved herd and system efficiency have led to improved feed conversion efficiency, and that's resulted in lower feed requirements and associated reduction in manure production. And I'd just like to show you this relationship between feed conversion ratio or feed efficiency shown on the bottom axis and greenhouse gas emissions shown on the vertical axis. And what this demonstrates is that as feed conversion ratio is improved, as feed conversion ratio is decreased, then greenhouse gas emissions linearly decrease as well. And this has not only significant impacts for improving the environmental footprint of pork production, but also has impacts on feed costs and therefore feed formulation. Farm animal welfare. Animal welfare concerns society, consumers, advocacy groups, and buyers and sellers of pork. And I just wanted to show you a recent article that appeared last month demonstrating a UK supermarket launching an app to track animal welfare on farm. This is an app based on QBA, or Qualitative Behavioural Assessment, and it allows animal welfare inspectors on farm to assign different states of emotionality, i.e. negative to positive, to pigs. It really tries to encapsulate a whole assessment of the quality of life of a pig, and this can be extended to other animals as well. And no doubt this will impact on policies and decisions in terms of purchasing and selling of, in this case, of pork. We need to remind ourselves that farmers and farm animal carers continue to strive to improve the welfare of their animals. This is a given in pork production. It's not negotiable. But sometimes we know that to improve welfare and to change practice, it costs money, and that can often act as a deterrent. But the converse is that there is a risk that doing nothing to improve welfare diminishes the farmer's social licence to operate and raise animals. Therefore, is there a way to assist those businesses facing the dilemma of which practice or which practices to change in order to improve farm animal welfare without adversely affecting profitability might be able to be done? Well, I came across this paper just a month or so ago, and it proposes a decision tool for businesses considering changes in practice to improve farm animal welfare. It's essentially a guide, if you like, to assist producers in making evidence-based decisions about farm animal welfare. And the way that this is interpreted is it's split into 4 quadrants, obviously. The horizontal axis, running here from negative to positive, is shows the effect of a change in practice on animal welfare, with a more positive effect towards the right-hand side. The vertical axis depicts the effect of the change in practice on business profitability, with a more positive effect on the business, or more profitability, shown towards the top. It's this top right-hand corner in green where we have positive effects on the animal and positive effects on the business. These are the practices. This is the area where there can be both gains for animal welfare and gains on profitability for the business. In contrast, the bottom left-hand quadrant, where there's negative welfare effects on the animal and negative effects on the business, is probably not where we want to be. We want to be moving towards this top right-hand quadrant where there are benefits for both animal welfare and benefits for the business. And in this regard, I think this question becomes very, very important. And the question is around piglet mortality and morbidity. Is this inevitable, or is it unacceptable into the future? Given the associations between larger litter size and piglet mortality and the associated sow welfare concerns of larger litters, is it ethical to continue these trends? And if management can be optimised and sow welfare can be improved, how much mortality is then acceptable? And other speakers in today's event will cover some of those points. So in terms of looking at some aspects about the piglet and the role of early life in maximising farm productivity and profitability, I wanted to focus specifically on the cost of low birth weight piglets. And again, other speakers will address this issue, but I just wanted to put a bit of a different slant on it. Low birth weight piglets, less than about 1.1 to 1.2 kilograms, are indeed a challenge for all production systems, especially those that operate on an all-in and all-out basis. They generally have greater pre-weaning death, slower growth rate, and decreased pork quality, and they can potentially account for up to 25% of the piglet population, not an insignificant number. It must be stressed that not all low birth weight pigs remain light throughout life and can perform well if managed and fed appropriately. And it's not just, it's many other factors can influence that growth, for example, from weaning through to slaughter. A recent Australian analysis of the cost of a low birth weight piglets estimated this to be about $15 per pig born alive. And that comprised extra days to market associated with extra feed, plus the extra cost of adjustment or the extra cost of housing. On top of that, there may be additional costs associated with negative impacts on carcass and or meat quality. So you can see that there are potentially significant financial costs associated with these light birth weight piglets. Now, what I want to focus on now is are some of the sources of those low birth weight piglets. And as we know in production, a proportion of those piglets will come from gilt litters. A number of years ago, the Australian pork industry looked at trying to optimise the progeny of first litters, because we know that gilts or first litter sows comprise a significant proportion of the herd, and the progeny or the young born to gilts, and I'll refer to those as gilt progeny or GP, represent a significant production penalty. Compared to progeny born to multipara sows or sow progeny, we know, and there's good documented evidence about this now, that gilt progeny are born lighter and wean lighter. They typically have a higher incidence of health problems and mortality, and they take longer to reach a saleable market weight. So this is some data from 2 production systems, a collection of data from 2 production systems in Australia developed through this project, comparing gilts and sows. And we can see very clearly when it comes to weight, gilt progeny at the same age are lighter at all time points. They tend to grow slower as a consequence of that. Although, as I mentioned before, just because they are lighter does not mean that they are any less efficient necessarily in converting that food, and actually can attain a sale weight in a reasonable length of time. And associated with differences in weights are changes in carcass characteristics. We also see impacts of dam parity on, for example, IgG concentrations and total protein in the piglet serum. This diagram from one of the studies published out of this project looked at serum concentrations of IgG and total protein at day 3 in both gilt progeny and sow progeny. And you can see that for both of these variables that those concentrations were lower. And that may be involved in the negative effects on health, mortality and morbidity that we see at a higher incidence in progeny from gilts. But what do gilt progeny cost? And this is really, I guess, in some ways, a parallel to the data I showed earlier about low birth weight piglets, because by association, gilt progeny are born lighter. Well, as part of this project, we looked at margin over feed costs. That is the margin, in whatever currency that might be, between revenue normalised to 1 kilogram of the carcass price and feed costs. And that provides a proxy or an estimate of profitability. Now, of course, margin over feed cost is a snapshot in time. It depends on many, many factors, such as the price grid that the pigs are marketed into, the weight ranges, current feed prices, growth rates, and so on and so forth. But at the time that this particular study was done, the margin over feed cost analysis across 2 of Australia's largest vertically integrated operations, the difference in margin over feed cost of gilt progeny versus sow progeny was around Australian $6 to $10 per slaughter pig in favour of sow progeny. Therefore, those gilt progeny are costing somewhere in the vicinity of, for example, $4.60 to $7.50 US, or $3.80 to $6.30 euros. Now, again, these were figures based on the estimates at the time. They're going to be different now, but I just wanted to give you some idea about what some of the production penalties associated with low birth weight piglets might be. What are some of the reasons for this? And Dr. Decaluwe will talk about this a little bit later on as well. But these 2 diagrams essentially show the relationship between age of the pigs from weaning, here at 4 weeks in the graph on the left-hand side, and here at about 3.5 weeks in the graph on the right-hand side. It shows the difference between, in kilograms body weight, the difference shown on the y-axis here, the difference between gill progeny and sow progeny at slaughter. So, for example, on the left-hand side, this is gill progeny and sow progeny here. There's about a 1 kilogram difference at weaning, but without any correction, without any statistical correction for weaning weight, that difference extends to about 5 kilograms at slaughter weight. If weaning weight was statistically corrected for, then essentially that difference disappears. And the same situation can be seen on the right-hand side here. This is another production system with a completely different genotype and different production practices, different diets and so on and so forth. No correction for weaning weight. There's a difference of about 4 kilograms at slaughter weight. If weaning weight and by corollary birth weight is statistically corrected for, then that difference is only about 1.5 kilograms. So I think what these two diagrams neatly show is the impact of early life growth and development and early life nutrition on whole of life performance through to market weight. So where are some of the gaps in knowledge that we might wish to focus on in the future to look at, for example, low birth weight piglets, look at survival, look at mortality, and look, for example, at health treatments? Indeed, gestation feeding and or management programs that reduce the proportion of low birth weight piglets and enhance litter uniformity and survival are critical. This will be covered by other speakers, and of course genetics is a huge component of those programs. I think experience, or the sow's experience with farrowing and lactation housing systems and subsequent effects on the welfare of both the sow and the piglets is an underexplored area and one that deserves further attention. This then relates to in utero nutrition and environmental exposure, potentially playing a key role in these effects. This idea of fetal imprinting, for example, through the microbiome or something around stress resilience. And in that respect, I think we know there's some recent evidence showing that in low birth weight piglets, there are links between mitochondrial dysfunction and oxidative stress physiology in utero in relation to post-weaning stress. But what we know now is that mitochondrial dysfunction and some of the physiology around oxidative stress in the piglet, in the uterus, is related to the susceptibility or the resilience of those piglets once they are weaned months, in some cases months later. That is a fascinating finding, and there certainly must be opportunities there for nutritional intervention. And then what are some of the postnatal early experiences and effects on stress resilience, emotionality, and how that can impact welfare of pigs later in life? And I just wanted to demonstrate this by referring to this particular study, which asked the question whether positive early life experiences have impacts on experiences later in life. So this was a study, the hypothesis essentially being that the provision of these ropes and newspapers to piglets in lactation will reduce tail biting after weaning. And it's based on the premise in other mammalian species that cognitive input, particularly stimulation of certain parts of the brain from early environmental experience and exposure, has permanent lifelong effects on neural development and behavioural imprinting. And the question that was asked in this experiment was whether novelty or sensory stimulation early in life can play a beneficial role later in life, in this instance for diminution of tail biting. So it's this concept of resilience priming. How can we prime some of these piglets either in utero or early in their life to make them more resilient, for example, to a stressful experience? And of course, what is the interaction or the potential interactions with nutrition? I think this is a really exciting area for exploration. So just to come to some concluding messages from my presentation today. Well, I don't need to tell you that the world has changed and will continue to change. And so too has the pork industry. And the pork industry is extremely resilient, but it must continue to adapt and evolve to face the disruptions and challenges that are before us. There's increasing pressure for the pork industry to be sustainable, and I think that was reflected in the response in the poll question today. Survival means a focus or a refocus on the basic principles of pork production. Biosecurity and hygiene, husbandry and management, welfare and environment, nutrition and immunity, looking at new technology, all of these associated with reducing costs and increasing revenue whilst meeting the increasing demands of societal expectations around farming and pork farming. The critical importance of sow and piglet nutrition during gestation, after weaning, after parturition rather, and after weaning cannot be underestimated. But I think there needs to be an evaluation of the economic assessment of practices and interventions through whole of life and whole of herd performance. And in this respect, and just to finish off, research and development is critical to face the challenges and improve businesses into the future. Thank you very much.
Okay, John, thank you very much for your nice overview and about the challenges we are in. And yeah, you had a lot of topics here, what you showed us. But if you want to say in one sentence, what is your advice for the customers for the best LifeStart?
Leo, I think it's look after your piglets, look after your sows and look after your piglets. Produce and then rear heavier, healthier, more resilient and better performing piglets, and they will reward you in terms of business in business principles. Yep. And leave you happier, healthier farmers yourselves.
Yep. Yeah. So I hear you saying health is key and nutrition and health is well connected. So you say have a focus. Yeah. Yeah. John, because of the time difference, you will not be in the Q&A session at the end of this conference. But you have some time now to answer a few questions which we got from the audience. And also to the attendants, feel free to ask questions by chat. Can be in English or in Spanish. John, my first question is, how does digitalization has an effect on swine industry, on piglet production, but maybe the whole pig production?
I'm sorry, Leo. I missed the first part of that.
Yeah, the digitalization. How does digitalization has an impact on swine production?
Okay. Yes, I got that. Thank you. Yeah, the smart farming, precision farming, digital technologies. It's certainly it's with us in some respects. We already have technologies around cameras, sensors, image analysis, and so on and so forth, and certainly some pork production businesses are using those very successfully. I think in the future, and again, some practices or some businesses are already employing these technologies, things like blockchain, the Internet of Things, algorithms, machine learning, robotics, all these digital, all these advances, technological advances with a digital interface can definitely have a role in the future. I think one of the challenges associated with the digital technologies is perhaps not so much on the technological side of it, but perhaps on the human side of it. And in a way, we want to go into those technologies to take some of the human element out of decision making and out of some of the work practices. But there also, I think, needs to be an upskilling and perhaps a capacity shift in some of our training and education to use these digital technologies to full advantage of the pork production businesses. Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, sure. I have a few other questions we got from the audience. One is you spoke about China, and there is a question, what is the forecast of change in pork consumption in China? Because we all know that China consume a lot of pork. It's hit by ASF, but does it also have a change in the consumption to your expectation?
Oh, I think I think the Chinese are trying very hard to maintain their high level of pork consumption, but are finding it difficult, and therein lies the record imports or exports rather being imported into China from some countries. And I read again today that exports out of the USA are again reaching new heights into China. But also, I think, China's a huge country with very large demographics. But I think also that the impacts of ASF and COVID-19 in that country will be changing the dietary preferences and dietary habits of some percentage of that population. And I did read an article the other day about plant-based foods gaining a little bit more traction in China, which is surprising.
I also read that recently new strains of the ASF virus is now popping up, has an effect. So there's also a question here from the audience, John. Does the ASF or other diseases has an impact on supply and on pricing around the globe?
Oh, I definitely. I think I'm not an economist, Leo, but I know enough about supply and demand, and certainly, last year when ASF was at part of its most severe in China, the price went up, and so too did export prices. I think global pork supply is always subject to fluctuations of supply and demand, and like I said in my presentation, we have this unprecedented combination of the impacts of ASF, and including new strains, which will further impact negatively on the Chinese pork industry, but will have some positive impacts on exports from other countries to fill that void of demand.
Yeah, great, John. Thanks. Yeah, you say we have fluctuations in the prices, and of course, everyone know we call it the pig cycle, the swine cycle, and that is influenced by several circumstances, like ASF is one of them. John, thank you very much for being with us, for your presentation. Really great to have the overview of what is going on. Also, thanks for answering, especially for you at this late hour of the day. And we wish you a very good night. John, thank you very much, and sleep well.
No problems, Leo, and thanks for allowing me to be involved.
Yep. Okay. We go to the other poll question. And the other poll question, the second one, is: what is the minimum amount of colostrum which must be ingested by an average-sized neonatal pig in order to acquire immune protection and sustain body growth? So what is the minimum amount of colostrum? And is it 1, 180 gram, 2, 250, 3, 320, or 4, 390 grams? 180, 250, 320, or 390? You have time enough to answer, because we have now a short break of about 10 minutes before we go to the presentation of Professor Chantal Farmer. See you after the break. So welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. The second topic of today is the essential role of the sow for piglet performance. And this was also the topic of our second poll question. What was the minimum amount of colostrum for an average piglet to have a good immune protection and body growth? Number 1, 180 grams was answered by 12%. Number 2, 250 grams, 58% of the people. Number 3, 320 grams was 27%, and 4, 390 grams was 3%. So the majority of the people said 250 grams. And who can better talk about this as Professor Chantal Farmer? She works already for decades on colostrum and milk production and mammary gland development in sows. And Professor Chantal Farmer, she is from the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, the Sherbrooke R&D Center in Quebec, in Canada. And we already collaborate for a long period with her. So it is a pleasure to have Chantal with us with the presentation. And in her presentation, she's talking about the optimum intake of colostrum in piglets. But before we go to her presentation, we have a third poll question. And the third poll question is: lower 10-week body weight originates 1, prenatally, 2, pre-weaning, 3, 3 to 4 days post-weaning, 4, 6 weeks post-weaning. So 1, prenatally, 2, pre-weaning, 3, 3 to 4 days post-weaning, 4, 6 weeks post-weaning. Take your time, because we first have the presentation of Chantal before we go to the outcome of this poll question. Chantal, the floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Chantal Farmer. I'm a research scientist with the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at the Sherbrooke Research and Development Center, and I've been working there for a good 35 years looking at sow lactation biology, trying to increase milk production in sows and increasing growth rate of piglets. So today it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to discuss with you the essential role of the sow for piglet performance. What I want to cover, first I will talk about colostrum. What is the composition of colostrum compared to milk? What are its main roles for piglets? What are the yields of colostrum that we can expect? In this presentation, I will not discuss composition. We don't have time. I will focus on the amount of colostrum produced. Then I will look at different factors of variation of this amount of colostrum that is produced, whether they're animal characteristics, hormonal status, or I will talk also about a project to prolong this phase where the colostrum is produced using oxytocin. Then I will move on shortly to discuss a little bit milk production by sows. Why do we want to maximize milk yield of sows? Mammary important. Is it important? If so, when does it take place? What are the factors of variation? And then I will cover 2 projects on the effect of T2s in parity 1 and milk yield in parity 2, and obviously end with short conclusions. So let's start at the beginning. Composition of colostrum. You can see here colostrum from 0 to 24 hours. Then you move on to transition milk from 36 to 72 hours. And at the end, you have, after that, you have milk. A major difference that you can see in terms of composition is mainly in terms of protein content. And this is nothing new to anyone here. Protein content drastically decreases between colostrum and milk. And that means that immunoglobulins, in here you see immunoglobulin G, More specifically, decreases also very much between colostrum and milk. Other components are also altered, dry matter. In fact, fat, lactose, and energy are greater in milk than colostrum. But the most important characteristics are the protein and IgG contents that are greater in colostrum. Newborn piglets are very vulnerable. Everybody knows that. They have very low energy reserves, only 1% of body fat. They have a low metabolic rate, no immune protection. They're really not doing so good at birth. So we have to help them. What is helping them? It's the colostrum from the sow. This colostrum is essential to provide the piglet with energy, to activate its own heat production, also to provide the piglet with passive immunity, mainly in the form of IgG, and also provide growth factors such as IGF-1, EGF, transforming growth factor beta. And these growth factors are important for the development and the maturation of the gastrointestinal tract of the baby pig. Another important role of colostrum is to provide bioactive components that will be useful later on for the development of certain organs. And this is called the maternal lactocrine programming. And an example of this is the hormone relaxin, which is present in the colostrum and is important to affect the development of the uterus when the animal reaches puberty. So colostrum is not only important for immunity, it's also important for a lot of developmental processes in the piglet. We know that the ingestion of 250 grams of colostrum by a piglet of average body weight will greatly reduce the risk of pre-weaning mortality, will provide a source of passive immunity, and will allow for body weight gain of those piglets. If a piglet is not consuming 250 grams of colostrum, it will not be able to gain weight. So if you look at a litter of 13 piglets, it means that the sow will need to produce 3.3 kilograms of colostrum. And in a study done by Hélène Canel in 2012, she showed that a third of the sows did not have enough colostrum to meet this need of the piglets. So we have a problem. Sows are not producing enough colostrum to meet the needs of all their piglets. This amount of colostrum produced is very variable. It can range between 1.9 to 5.3 kilogram in that 24-hour period. And it averages about 3.5, 3.6 kilo in most studies. Now, what is it affected by? Does the sow affect colostrum yield? And the answer is yes. And one very important point is that the amount of colostrum that the piglet will ingest in the first 24 hours after birth will be greater if the piglet is bottle fed, so more than 450 grams per kilogram of body weight. If the piglet is bottle fed, so on top of the milk from the sow, it's getting milk from a bottle. And if the piglet is only suckling its own dam, it will ingest between 200 and 373 grams per kilo. What is it telling us? The sow does limit the amount of colostrum ingested by the piglets. So we need to try to increase the amount of colostrum that the sow is producing. So what are the factors from the sow side of things that could affect the yield? When people looked at the effects of age or body weight of the sow, there was no effect on colostrum yield. Gestation length, well, 113 days of gestation showed in a study greater colostrum yield than 114 or 115 days of gestation. Farrowing duration, no effect on colostrum yield. Parity. Now, parity, yes, it does have an effect. If you look at parities 2 and 3 in one study, they produced more colostrum than parities 1 or older sows. In another study, parities 1, 2, 3 produced more colostrum. And in another study, sows from parities 1 and 2 produce more colostrum. So basically what you need to remember, the younger sows produce more colostrum. And this is exactly the opposite to what happens with milk yield, because milk yield is greater in multiparous sows. So parity affects milk and colostrum yields differently. Litter size has no effect on colostrum yield on the first day postpartum. Another study, more recent, compared 9 to 12 piglets. and there was no effect of that difference in litter size on their growth rate in the first 3 days postpartum, so no effect on colostrum yield. One thing that is very important relating to litter size is that the amount of colostrum ingested per piglet decreases by 22 to 42 grams with each extra piglet. So when we have these nice hyper-prolific sows, we have a problem because each little extra piglet above 6 piglets will ingest less colostrum. What's the role of the piglet in itself in terms of colostrum ingested? Well, birth weight, the role of birth weight is not really clear. There's some contradictory evidence in the literature. One thing is sure, is that the global vitality of the litter seems to be important. Authors seem to agree on that. And this is relating to the birth to suckling interval. The shorter time it takes for the piglet to suckle after birth, the greater colostrum yield. So again, this is related to vitality of the litter. The more vigorous the piglets are, the sooner they will get up and suckle the mammary gland, and the sooner they will get colostrum, and this will in fact increase colostrum yield. Hormones affect the amount of colostrum produced. The whole process of colostrogenesis is controlled by hormones. Right before parturition, there's a big peak of prolactin. I've done a study where I inhibited that peak, and what happened? Well, all the piglets would have died because there was no onset of colostrogenesis. So that peak is essential for colostrum and milk to be produced. When you combine the peak of prolactin with the decrease in progesterone taking place at the end of gestation, those two hormones together lead to the onset of lactation, hence also the production of colostrum. Interestingly, with these two hormones, it was shown that if you have a greater ratio of prolactin to progesterone in the blood of the sow 24 hours before parturition, this is related with a greater colostrum yield. So yes, hormones in the sow can affect the amount of colostrum produced. What do producers do that can affect hormones around parturition? Well, farrowing induction is one great example of this. We often use prostaglandins to induce farrowings. And could this affect the amount of colostrum produced? If you induce farrowings with prostaglandins on days 114, there's no effect. On day 111 or 113, there's a tendency to decrease yield. But if you do this earlier, so day 109 of gestation, there's a 32% decrease in colostrum yield. So you don't want to induce farrowing too early in gestation. Colostrum composition is affected by the status of the junctions that are present between mammary epithelial cells. You see here the junctions, the space between the mammary epithelial cells. On one side, you have the sow blood, and during colostrum production, the spacing between these cells is large, so the tight junctions are not tight, so that IgG and other large molecules can go from the sow blood to the colostrum. As lactation advances, these junctions become tighter, and the big molecules will not be able to pass between these cells. It was found in goats, in rodents, and in cows that if you inject a very high amount of oxytocin, it can alter the permeability of these junctions between the mammary cells, hence the composition of the early milk. And that has never been shown in sows, but there is no reason why it wouldn't be the same thing in sows. And in fact, in pigs, this would be most important, because if you give an extra 15 ml of colostrum to a small piglet in the first 4 hours after its birth, it will increase its amount in immunoglobulin G in its circulation, and it will decrease its mortality. So I'm going to cover here a project I've done, asking myself, can injections of a high dose of oxytocin in the early postpartum period prolong this phase of colostrum production by altering the status of the junctions between mammary epithelial cells? We use second parity sows, divided them in two groups. So oxytocin in one case, where animals received 75 international units of oxytocin, and control animals receiving saline. The Animals received 4 injections in total, 2 per day, morning and afternoon. And the injections started between 12 to 20 hours after birth of the last piglet. We standardized litters and weighed the piglets on a regular basis. We also injected the sows on days 80 and then the booster on day 95 with ovalbumin. Why did we do that? To increase the antibody titer in the sow blood against this antigen, and then to see if in our treated animals, there would be a greater amount of this antibody that would be in the colostrum when we treat the animals with oxytocin. So we took milk samples day 2, and farrowing was actually day 1. So that's 24 hours after farrowing, morning, afternoon, then days 4 and 5. Looked at standard composition and also at sodium and potassium. Why? Because the sodium to potassium ratio will give you an indication of the status of these tight junctions. The more sodium there is, the more space there is between these mammary cells. Okay, let's look at the results. You can see here on the horizontal axis, the day of lactation, where we took the sample of milk, and on the vertical axis, what we measured in the milk. If you look on the right-hand side first, fat percent, lactose percent, no differences between the treated and the controls. The treated animals are in blue, controls are in pink. But if you move on the left-hand side, on day 2, remember the farrowing is on day 1, so day 2 in the afternoon, the animals had received 1 injection of oxytocin, already significantly more energy. If you go on the bottom left-hand side, significantly more protein also. And if we move on here, you can see on the right-hand side and the top, sodium-potassium ratio significantly increased. So after 8 hours of having received an injection of oxytocin, large amount, the tight junctions remain open. So sodium to potassium greater, so more room for big molecules to pass. And you can see this when you look at the bottom, IGF-1, which is a growth factor, a large peptide, it will still pass. So 8 hours after the injection, there is more of this growth factor in the lacteal secretions. On the top left-hand corner here, you see IgG, so immunoglobulin G, significantly increased 8 hours after the first injection. Also on the right-hand side, IgA are also increased, but there's less of IgA in terms of concentration in colostrum. And at the bottom here, interesting, the specific antibody that we raised in the sows against ovalbumin, you can see here, day 2 in the afternoon, 8 hours after the injection, yes, it is greater in the lacteal secretions. Now, how about the piglets? If you look at body weight, they started with a similar birth weight, and at any time where we took measurements, there is no difference in terms of body weight between the 2 groups. However, let me remind you, we only used 10 liters in this case. In my mind, 10 liters is not enough to be able to say if growth rate of the piglet is affected. You would need a larger amount of litters. On the other side, when we looked at the mortality of piglets, the number of pigs born was similar in the 2 groups, but there was a tendency for a greater incidence of mortalities occurring in the control animals compared to the oxytocin animals. So this is something that is most likely even more important than the growth rate, the fact that there could be an improvement in terms of survival of these piglets. What can we conclude? 1 injection of 75 international units of oxytocin in early lactation, yes, it can prolong the colostral phase, and we've seen this through an increase in sodium potassium in the milk within 8 hours of injection. This leads to beneficial effects in terms of the quality of milk in early lactation. It will increase protein, immunoglobulins G, immunoglobulin A, and specific antibodies, like in this case, the antibody against ovalbumin. All this suggests passive transfer to piglets, which is prolonged through this treatment. Now let's move to the second essential role of the sow for piglets, the production of milk. When you look at the production of milk by sows, you realize that they produce more milk than cows on a per kilogram basis in terms of body weight. So somebody may say, what's the problem? She produces a lot of milk. No, there is a problem. The sow is not producing enough milk to sustain maximal growth of her piglets. If you take a baby pig and on top of the milk it's consuming, you take a bottle and you give it artificial milk, that piglet will grow more. So it's telling us the piglet has the capacity to grow more than from the milk the dam is providing. If you look at milk yield in past years, yes, there has been an increase in milk yield. You know, we've done our job. There was good selection, but then it's remained pretty stable since 1998. But what do we have? On the other hand, we have had greater success in increasing litter size. We have what I call a new problem of hyperprolificity. It's not a problem for me because it gives me a job, because I have to make sure that these piglets get enough milk, because the amount of milk ingested per piglet has actually decreased. So how can we go about increasing sow milk yield? Wish it would be as easy as this picture, but no, it isn't. There's a lot of factors affecting milk yield. There are sow factors. I will just name them here. I don't have time to go through them, but genetics will have an effect. Breed will have an effect. Parity, I already discussed this. Litter size, stage of lactation, suckling interval. All these factors have an effect on milk yield. Now there's factors that come from the environment. Outside factors can also affect sow milk yield, such as photoperiod, ambient temperature, you don't want it to have any heat stress, continuous high noise, which may be bad in terms of nursing behavior, hormones, nutrition, all these factors can affect milk yield. But one factor has not been considered too much until about 15 or 10 years ago, and that one is mammary development. And it makes a lot of sense to look at it. Why? It was found in 1991 that the number of cells that secrete milk that are present in the mammary tissue at the beginning of lactation is a major factor that limits milk yield. It makes a lot of sense. The more cells you have that can synthesize milk, the greater your capacity to produce larger quantities of milk is. So this is important. Also, there's a correlation that was found between the size of a mammary gland and its milk yield, which was measured by the weight of the piglet nursing that teat. And these authors have concluded by a wonderful statement. Replacement yield should be managed so as to enhance the mammary development. But yes, how do we do that? So I could talk to you about another hour just about that topic. But today, what I will select is just a small component of that. First, you need to know, when does mammary gland development take place in pigs? When you look at a piglet at birth, it has a very poorly developed mammary duct system. Then you have 3 stages of rapid mammary development. In pre-puberty, starting at 90 days of age to puberty. In the last third of gestation, starting at 90 days of gestation to farrowing. So the number 90 is what's important in terms of timing of mammary development. And then you also have development in lactation. Very important to know that it's only during the periods where you do have mammary development that somebody can do anything to try to stimulate it. I always say 3 times 0 gives you 0. There's no sense trying to use hormones or nutrition to stimulate mammary development when there is none to start with. So it's during those periods only that we can try to stimulate the development. Again, there's many factors that can influence mammary development: physiological status of the animal, hormones, nutrition, management, suckling intensity. And today I will focus on 2 projects dealing with one aspect, which is that of suckling intensity or use of a teat. I've asked myself the question, what is the possible impact of a non-use of a teat in first lactation on its milk yield in the next lactation? Is it important or not? So what I've done is a study where I've blocked either the same teats during parities 1 and 2 or different teats during parities 1 and 2, so that in the second parity, piglets suckled either teats that were used before or not used before. So you can see this here in lactation 1, we had an average of 14 functional teats. We always blocked the rear ones because they're difficult for piglets to access. So of the other ones, we blocked 2 on one side, 2 on the other, and then we also considered front, middle, and rear position on the mammary glands. So we took into account position and side of the gland when blocking them. And then in parity 2, what did we do? We either blocked the same teats. So piglets were now nursing a gland that has been used before, or we blocked different teats. Now the piglets are using or are nursing from glands that were not used in the previous lactation. And in that second lactation, we used 6 piglets per litter because there were 6 teats. We used piglets of similar weight, good piglets. We did not want the piglet to be making any difference. The difference actually only came from the fact that they were using a teat that was used or not before. When you look at the results, in parity 2, you look at the weight of the piglets. On day 2, there was no difference, which is good. It's the beginning of the trial. But then as you go on, day 4, 7, 14, you look at the difference between these weights of the piglets, and the difference keeps getting bigger and bigger. And on day 56, you actually have 1.12 kilogram more in terms of body weight of piglets that are suckling a teat that has been used before. So now I can tell producers, yes, it is important to have a teat suckled in the first lactation if you want that teat to produce more milk in the second lactation. And interestingly, if you look at the difference in weight gain of the piglet between days 2 and 4, and remember, farrowing was on day 1, so that's as of 24 hours after farrowing, you already see a significant increase in gain and body weight gain of these piglets. What is it suggesting? That colostrum yield is also improved. So use of a teat increases milk yield, but it may very well also increase the amount of colostrum produced. Now this leads to the second question. Okay, I was all happy telling this information to producers, and firsthand I had raised in the room was, yes, but do we need the teat to be used for the whole first lactation for that teat to produce enough milk in the second lactation? Excellent question. So I did a project asking myself the question, what is the minimum time that a teat has to be suckled in first lactation in order for its milk yield not to be decreased in second lactation? So in first parity, we divided sows in 3 groups according to lactation length, 2 days, 7 days, 21 days. Second parity, everybody had a 21-day lactation. We had 12 piglets for 12 teats, and we weighed the piglets on a regular basis. So now when we look at the weight of these piglets, you see length of lactation 1, either 2 days, 7 days, 21 days. Weight of these piglets from day 2 to day 56, no difference. Some of my scientific friends may tell me, boy, Chantal, those are boring results. That's a horrible study. And I will answer, it's completely the opposite. Those are wonderful results. What is it telling me? It's telling me it doesn't matter if I go above 2 days, 7 days, 21 days in first lactation, the teat being used, doesn't bring much more improvement. But 2 days is the minimum amount of time that the teat needs to be used in first parity for it to have an adequate milk yield in the next parity. Now I come with my conclusions from all these. Ingesting 250 grams of colostrum is essential for the survival and growth of newborn piglets. If they don't ingest that much, they will not grow. The amount of colostrum produced by sows is very variable, and the sow is actually limiting the amount of colostrum ingested by the piglets. So we need to attempt to increase colostrum yield. There's a lot of factors that will affect colostrum yield. Some of these are animal factors, either sow factors or piglet factors. Hormonal status will affect colostrum yield. And one thing that is important for producers is the timing of the farrowing induction. You don't want to induce farrowing too early. So day 109 is too early for induced inducing farrowings. Now, vigor of the litter is important because it will decrease the interval between birth and suckling. And this is most important in large litters. So, in fact, anything you can do to assist newborn piglets to go to the other as soon as possible will be beneficial for them to consume more colostrum. Recent results have shown that with one injection of a very high dose of oxytocin, 75 international units, in that early postpartum period will prolong the colostrum phase and will improve the quality of early milk. Now, if you look at milk yield, the sow, again, limits piglet growth because she's not producing enough milk. Enhancing mammary development, yes, it will lead to an increase in milk yield. So this is something we do need to look at. Suckling of a teat for 2 days after birth in first parity is important for its milk yield in second parity. So if you have animals in first parity that are very thin and you don't want to leave the whole litter on them because they will lose too much body condition, yes, you can remove piglets. Please wait on day 3 if farrowing is day 1. So you need to wait a good 48 hours before you remove those piglets from the sow, but then it will be okay. Now I want to thank you for having listened to me virtually to this presentation. And I want to mention that if you want any more specific information on the gestating and lactating sow, I've edited a book that was published in 2015 and which is available from Wageningen Academic Press. I'm not saying this to make money, I'm just saying it in case it's useful for you. And also more recently, just in 2020, I've edited another book with the same publication house. And now this one is more specific on the suckling and weaned piglet. So if you have any interest, please go ahead and look at these books. And I just want to end also by saying that the job is not finished when the piglet is weaned. And it's also important to best assist the piglets after weaning. And this is something that will be covered by the next speaker after me. So thank you again.
Yes, thank you, Chantal, for your presentation. And we see that the sow play an extremely important role in the development of the piglets, not only at birth, but also afterwards with the colostrum production and the milk production. And you showed examples what you can do in order to improve. Thank you very much. We go now to our next expert, and that's Professor Dominiek Maes. Dominiek has already for a long time experience in health management, in porcine health management. He is working at the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at Ghent University in Belgium. And the title of his presentation is A Good Beginning is Half of the Battle Won. So especially on the piglet, what to do. And it's great to have you with us, Dominiek. But before we go to your presentation, we look to the outcome of the third poll, where we asked lower the 10-week body weight originates from prenatally, which is given 56%, pre-weaning 22%, 3 to 4 days post-weaning 10%, 12% is for 6 weeks post-weaning. So the majority say it's prenatally. Dominiek, before you go to your presentation, what would be your answer? And please give a reaction on the answers we got from the attendants.
Thank you, Leo. Actually, every phase is important, and that is also shown in the responses. The prenatal phase is ranked quite high in the poll. I would have given a little bit less weight to that, because if we look at weight at 10 weeks, I think also the phase after weaning is important for growth. And the phase before weaning is, of course, also important, and especially for survival and these things. But anyway, every phase is important. But if I look at the answers, I would have put slightly more emphasis on the phase after weaning.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for your reaction. And the floor is yours for your presentation. Dominiek.
Thank you, Leo. So a good beginning is half of the battle won. It's applicable in many areas in life and also in pig production. And as Chantal mentioned in her presentation, lactation is of course crucial for the early growth and health of the piglets, but there are also other factors that are important for performance of our piglets. Factors pre-weaning and also factors after weaning. And that's actually what I would like to discuss with you in the current or in the next 30 minutes. So short introduction, then the critical issues before weaning, critical issues after weaning, and logically we will end with some conclusions. As already mentioned also by Chantal, our sows have become much more prolific in the last decades. We have a significant increase in the total number of piglets born. We also have a significant increase in the total number of pigs weaned, but as you can see, the prenatal death, the stillborn, and also the pre-weaning mortality has increased. And I think we in the past, we lost, let us say, 2 piglets. Now we lose 3 piglets, or in some farms, even more, due to stillborn or due to mortality between birth and weaning. So it is important also to try to minimize these losses, because all the investments in these piglets have been done. So we should try to have as much as possible piglets alive until weaning. And another thing is, and that was also covered already in the previous presentation, is that the peripartal period of the sow is quite a critical period. There are a lot of changes for the sow, change in housing, in nutrition, in management, in metabolism, in hormones, and all these things. So logically also that we face a lot of problems in many farms, problems with insufficient feed intake, farrowing that is too slow, that takes place too early, sows that do not eat enough, also insufficient milk production. Well, quite a lot of problems that may occur there, problems that might be independent, but very often are linked to each other. So it's very important to approach that with a multidimensional approach, so that you do not only look at one aspect, but from different perspectives. But actually that is an introduction for my presentation, because we will focus on the critical issues in the farrowing unit. So we will focus on the piglets and not on the sow. But anyway, I just want to start with one slide on milk production or insufficient milk production, hypogalaxia or dysgalaxia syndrome, as we often see in pig farms. In the past, we had more the form MMA, mastitis, metritis, agalaxia, so the inflammation of the udder or the endometrium. This still is possible in some farms, but by far the majority of the problems that we see with insufficient milk production is a form in which we do not really see inflammation of the sow or clinical disease of the sow, but the sow has not sufficient milk in the udder, does not look sick. Maybe she eats less, but she has no fever. There is no swelling of the udder. And this form actually is very important because our piglets, our numerous piglets nowadays, they cannot suckle enough colostrum or milk. MMA still occurs, but it is a subform of the PDS syndrome. Of course, as a farmer, we have to implement proper management practices to handle these numerous piglets, these large litters, in order to survive them until weaning. There are many different possibilities, procedures that can be used, and every farm has more or less its own procedures. Split suckling is often used. Cross-fostering also. We will discuss these two strategies. Multi-suckling, in which the piglets can move from one sow to another, is used in some farms. Foster sows are often used. Early weaning of piglets also. And of course, also we should provide sufficient creep feed to the piglets already from an early age onwards, so that we can provide sufficient energy and all other nutrients to the piglets, in addition to the milk that they can have from the sow. Split suckling can be applied during the colostrum phase, so at the beginning, and also later on. And many farms practices split suckling during the colostral phase, likely less during the milk phase. During colostrum phase, the firstborn piglets should be identified. For instance, the first 6 born. We can separate them under a heat lamp for a few hours, not too long. And this allows the other piglets who are born later to also suckle sufficient colostrum. During the milk phase, the same strategy is possible, but during that phase, it's mainly aimed to have or to obtain more homogeneous litters. So a strategy that is often or sometimes practiced is to separate the heaviest piglets for instance, a couple of hours, so that the smaller piglets have time to suckle more milk, so that they can also grow sufficiently and keep up with the weight gain of the larger pigs. Cross-fostering is also applied. It may depend on the number of functional teats in relation to the litter size. It's recommended to do that after the colostrum phase. It's possible that the heaviest pigs are moved to another sow, or the smallest pigs. That depends on the foster sow or the procedure on the farm. We recommend not to exaggerate with that, so to try to limit the number of pigs from different sows, mainly for biosecurity reasons. And also we recommend to keep notes so that we know how many pigs have been transferred from one sow to another. A third thing that is very important is to start with providing creep feed already early in life, as already mentioned. This is important in any farm, also in, let us say, litters that are not so large, so that pigs should be transferred, so in normal litter sizes, but especially and in particular also important if we have highly prolific sows with large litters. Providing creep feed during the first week has been shown to be important for the maturation of the gut microbiome. So although the amount of creep feed that is ingested by the piglets at that time is quite low, nevertheless, it has been shown that it has an important role on maturation of the microbiome in the gut. And the second stage, it's also important to adapt the suckling piglets to the feed that they will receive after weaning. A lot of studies have been conducted on what should be in such a feed, so the composition, and there have been some interesting research that we have performed with Trouw Nutrition and Nutreco on the role of fibers in the diet of such piglets. And Hubert van Hees, who is doing the research, showed in his studies that such creep feed with the fibers, and that may alter the large intestinal morphology, that it may influence the fermentation and also the microbial population, especially in the hind gut. And he also saw some differences depending on the type of fiber that was included. In a subsequent study, he also investigated the effects post-weaning, And a little bit surprisingly, we could not show an influence on the post-weaning health and performance of the piglets. But anyway, it's quite a research area where there is still some novelty and still some research to do so that we can optimize the nutrition for the piglets before weaning in order to adapt them to the post-weaning phase. Apart from the composition of the feed, also the format, the pallet size, for instance, is important. And a Canadian study showed that actually larger pallets, 9 to 12 millimeter versus 3 to 4 millimeter, improved post-weaning performance. So I also, from that point of view, it's important to look for the optimal pallet size or the optimal format in which the diets are provided to our piglets. Apart from nutrition and management, it's also imperative to provide an optimal housing condition and ambient climate. Here in these figures, you see on the left side a group of piglets that stick together because they have too cold. On the right side, on the other hand, they lie away from each other, likely because it's too warm. It's more than their comfort temperature. So if you enter a farrowing house, it's very important to look carefully at the behavior of the animals, also the housing conditions, because we can learn a lot from that. And sometimes we have the reflex to think immediately in terms of diseases and differential diagnosis, but the first thing we should do is looking carefully and with our eyes. Here in this slide, you see the energy that is available in the piglets at birth on the left side here. Here you see the energy that is needed for maintenance and also for performance at thermo-neutral conditions, so in optimal conditions. And here on the right side, you see what the energy requirements are for piglets that are housed below thermal neutrality. So if it's too cold in the farrowing house. And you can see that such piglets need a lot of extra energy just for thermoregulation. So this is all energy that is then spent to compensate an insufficient stable climate, whereas it could be used also for growth, health, and performance. So it's imperative to provide an optimal climate in farrowing house and actually also post-weaning, as we will see in a minute. Most of our farrowing houses are built in a classical way with a crate for the sows and then the piglets that are housed with the sow. This has been used for decades, but in the last 5 to 10 years, more and more research has been done on loose housing systems for lactating sows. And I think that in the future, that might become even more important, maybe because of the pressure from society that loose housing gives the sow more opportunities to express normal maternal behavior, nest building behavior, and all that stuff. Here you see in this table the advantages and the critical issues for the sows, for the piglets, and also for the farmer. For the sows, advantages, more space and maternal behavior possibilities, a better transition possibly from the gestation unit to the farrowing house. Critical issues are that lactation estrus might be more prevalent, and that also we need to investigate more the fertility post-weaning, whether that has changed, improved, or decreased, so that needs further research. For the piglets, they have more space and explorative behavior, which may also be important because our litter sizes become larger. So in the current crates or maternities, they do not have so much space in total and also at the other. For the piglets also, there might be a better transition after weaning. critical issues, and possibly the most critical issue of loose housing systems, is the fact that there might be a higher mortality. Further research on pre-weaning growth is also needed. The nursing might be disrupted more if you have piglets from different sows that may come together. So and for the farmer, more animal welfare as such leads to a better perception by the society. So indirectly, that might also motivate the farmer, because he is working in a more animal-friendly way. Of course, such systems require more space, and that's a cost again. And also, there might be more labor, and I think also the stockmanship might be more critical. Different systems with advantages and disadvantages. The efficiency may depend on the system, but definitely also on the stockmanship of the farmer working with a particular system. Also, we know that there is individual sow variation. Some sows do not have problems with loose housing, whereas others are more difficult. Vitality of the piglets. Often in studies, only the best piglets are used, and litters are standardized until 14 piglets. But if we have 16 or 18 piglets, how do the systems perform then? These are all things that need further to explore in further studies. We have talked so far about management, about nutrition, about housing conditions, which are, of course, imperative for a good performance. But we should realize that we also have infectious diseases. We hope that their influence is minimal in farms, but yeah, as a veterinarian, we often see problems with diarrhea in piglets. Neonatal diarrhea, usually associated with the high mortality, but also diarrhea throughout the farrowing house during the lactation. As such, not associated necessarily with a high mortality, but if you have diarrhea, there is immediately much more work for the farmer, treatment costs, hygiene problems, and so on. So that's definitely a disease condition that requires a lot of attention. Apart from diarrhea, which is most important in young piglets, not only in pigs, but also in other animal species, also other disease conditions may occur in lactating pigs, such as arthritis, paleness, sneezing, skin diseases. These conditions may also lead to mortality, uneven growth, and also a lower weaning weight. So it's important that we also implement proper control measures for these diseases. This brings us then to the weaning and the post-weaning phase. Actually, in the European Union, it's not allowed to wean piglets at an age younger than 4 weeks. In nature, the weaning process takes place between 2 to 3 months of age, and it's a gradual process. However, the European legislation says that you can wean at 3 weeks of age onwards if there are special facilities for the weaned piglets. And the nursery facilities in most farms can be considered as special facilities. So very often the interpretation of the EU legislation is made from 3 weeks of age weaning is allowed. It's only by exception that piglets can be weaned younger than 3 weeks of age. Health reasons for the sows or the piglets is classified as such exceptions. Outside the EU, piglets can be weaned at a younger age. Is that preferred? Is that good? Well, it has advantages and disadvantages. The advantages are that there is a lower risk for pathogen transmission from the sow to the offspring, because many diseases are transferred from the sow to the piglets. We have a shorter reproduction cycle for the sows, and also we use the farrowing units, the most expensive units in a pig farm, more efficient. Disadvantages, the weaning weight is lower, so extra care for the piglets is needed. Our sows are used more intensively, which may decrease the longevity of the sows. And also fertility post-weaning may be decreased in case we wean the piglets at the age younger than 3 weeks. Anyway, if we wean piglets and we do not really have major health or disease problems, it has a significant effect on the piglet. It's a stress for the piglet, and we see that translated in a decreased integrity of the intestinal epithelium. We see that the height of the villi decreased, also the microvilli, and we have more cribs. So even if the weaning process is more or less occurring without problems, we have these effects on the morphology of the intestines. And we also see that if we look at the feed intake of the piglets shortly after weaning, that during the first days, on average, it's only 100 to 200 grams per day. This is on average. We know that there is a very large variation between pens in the farm, or even between animals within a pen. Some pigs start eating very shortly after weaning, and the same in the next hours, and so the same day. Other piglets do not eat immediately and start eating only the next day or even later. So anyway, there is an insufficient energy for maintenance in many piglets in the first days after weaning. And it is important, however, to provide a sufficient feed intake after weaning to minimize the atrophy and all these morphological changes in the intestinal epithelial cells. In terms of feed composition, what should we pay attention to? Well, good digestible proteins, carbohydrates, and also essential amino acids are important. Recently weaned piglet has more problems to lower the pH in the stomach, which is important because the stomach is a buffer against pathogens. So if the pH remains too high for a too long period, and that increases the risk for diseases. So we should try to minimize nutrients that have a buffering capacity. So such nutrients are, for instance, proteins or minerals. Also, we should avoid damaging substances like lectins in soybeans. Provide sufficient vitamins like A, E, and C. Vitamin E and selenium, they have an antioxidant activity, which is important definitely in that stage of production, because at weaning, the animals lose lactation immunity. So infections occur, very often E. coli, but also other infections may occur. Infections produce free radicals. These are toxic substances for the tissue damage. So it's important to have sufficient antioxidant activity. We should also pay attention to essential fatty acids because we know that they are precursors for molecules involved in immune response. Omega-3 fatty acids in weaning diets have been shown to be associated with less E. coli infections and more feed intake. Spray diet plasma, very good digestible proteins, also source of immunoglobulins are important during that phase. Organic acids are often used in feed or also in drinking water and have been shown to be beneficial against E. coli infections. Also, pre- and probiotics may have beneficial effects on the microbiome, the immune response, inflammatory response of the animal. Zinc oxide has been banned in the EU. The final ban is in 2022, but many countries in the EU have already stopped with providing zinc oxide because of resistance issues and also because of the environment, because zinc is a heavy metal and have an influence on the soil and the environment. Apart from the content of the feed, the composition of the feed, also the type of feed and the format of the feed is important. In case pellets are provided, we should preferably provide a soft pellet because the intake is better with such pellets. Wet feeding means that you have the feed, the meal, or the pellets that are provided, and in that feeding trough there is also one or several drinking nipples, so that the pig can make an own mixture, and that may lead to a better intake. Liquid feed, in which the feed is pumped into the pipes, has several advantages. That has been shown by Dr. Pluske already several years ago. The dry matter level of such feed is comparable with the dry matter level in sow milk. And the composition is in line with the requirements for nutrients and water, and the pig does not need to discriminate between hunger and thirst, which is very advantageous at that stage of production. Also, other aspects which has to do with the way in which or how feed is provided or drinking water is provided is important. A sufficient number of feeding places, a good accessibility to the feeding places is important. The same applies to the drinking nipples. And in addition to that, also the quality of the drinking water is very important. And I know from experience that on many pig farms, the quality of the drinking water is sometimes not optimal. There may be deviations in chemical composition, and there may also be bacteriological contamination. And also the flow of the drinking nipples is important and should also be checked regularly. Other aspects of management practices that may be used in some farms to alleviate the problems post-weaning are maybe increasing slightly the weaning age, for instance, moving from 23 days to 26 days of age might already be sufficient in some farms to decrease or prevent E. coli infections or problems, because we know that if the piglets are older and they have more mature enzyme activity, and this may be sufficient to minimize the problems post-weaning. However, it should be mentioned also that it does not mean that weaning pigs at 4 weeks of age that you will not have problems with edema disease or post-weaning diarrhea. So it's only the risk that is decreased, but still it's possible in some farms. Intermittent suckling has been studied also in different studies, but an interesting and also good study that's still valid nowadays is the study of Decaluwe in 2010, in which she showed that intermittent suckling stimulates the feed intake of the entire litter during lactation and the first weeks post-weaning. It also improves the average daily gain shortly after weaning. However, she showed that there were no long-lasting effects on feed intake and growth. So at the end of the nursery, there was no difference anymore. And she also showed that it stimulates mainly the feed intake of the pigs that had already a good feed intake during lactation. So more the problem piglets or the weakest piglets did not really benefit from that system. Limiting mixing of different litters to reduce stress and also from a biosecurity point of view. Providing more light during the first days after weaning might be beneficial to increase feed intake. However, if there is a problem with aggression or biting or skin lesions, you should be careful with providing more light or more intense light after weaning, because they may fight more and induce more skin injuries. Stocking density, as such, is not a problem immediately after weaning, but is a problem on many farms in the last week or 10 days at the nursery when the pigs become heavier. Other aspects that can be considered is that the pen size. Most of our weaned pigs are housed in pens with 15 to 30 pigs. Sometimes larger groups are used, And then you can question, well, is there a difference on weaning problems, on performance, if you house them in smaller groups or in bigger groups? Larger groups have the disadvantage that's more difficult to identify problem pigs. If there is a few pigs with diarrhea and you have 100 pigs, it's not so easy to find them. In terms of effects on performance, actually there were no major differences in the range from 10 to 60 pigs per pen. There was one study that showed that if you compare a pen size of 20 compared to 100 pigs per pen, that the average daily gain was lower in the larger pen, and there was also more weight variation. Finally, also management is related to moving the pigs immediately at weaning, or do we wait a couple of days? In some farms, not that many, but there are some farms that keep the piglets at weaning in the farrowing house and only move them after a couple of days, so that the amount of different stress factors is spread over a longer period and that they do not experience them all at once. Splitting the group after some weeks is also practiced in a few farms, but I'm not really in favor of that because it causes an extra stress then after a few days. But it's sometimes done because of practical reasons and restrictions in capacity, in housing capacity. It goes without saying that an all-in-all-out management system is important, that hygiene is important because the pigs are vulnerable at that stage, so we should take care that the facilities are properly cleaned and disinfected, and ideally also a stand empty period is respected before we move a new batch of piglets in our nursery facilities. Ambient temperature and airspeed are important because both determine the microclimate. So it's important that the climate is in accordance with the comfort zone of the piglets. So it's where the piglets are housed in the pens, and at that place, in the temperature and the airspeed should be optimum. So do not only focus on temperature, but also consider airspeed and in some cases maybe also relative humidity. And just to show an example, if you have here in this figure, if you have an air temperature of 25 degrees at the level of the piglets, and you have an air velocity of 0.15 meter per second, the heat loss of the piglets under these circumstances is the same as if it is only 20 degrees Celsius warm in the environment, and if there is almost no air velocity. So it's not only the temperature, but it's a combination with the air speed or velocity. As we mentioned in the piglets before weaning, also after weaning, there are quite a lot of infections that may actually intervene with optimal health and optimal production and cause quite a lot of losses. E. coli infections causing diarrhea or edema disease in the immediate post-weaning phase are most important, together with streptococci infections, which usually occur slightly later in the second, third, or fourth week after weaning. But remember, it's not only about E. coli and streptococci. There are many other infections that may also play a role, and it's up to the farmer together with the herd veterinarian to find out which pathogens play a key role in causing problems in a farm. So in conclusion, birth weight, pig fatality, and colostrum and milk production are very important for the health, performance, and also the welfare of the piglets, not only in the immediate postnatal phase, but also in the long term, in the phase after weaning, and even during the fattening period. I hope to have shown that there are many management factors, nutrition factors, housing conditions that are important to determine the survival of our piglets and also the growth of our piglets before weaning. Weaning causes severe stress to the piglets. I think it's the most severe stress that they experience in addition to birth. There is loss of lactogenic immunity, so we should focus on avoiding infections or minimize the effect of infections. And we have also illustrated the critical role, again, of nutrition, management and housing conditions in the post-weaning phase. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, for listening to my presentations, and I look forward to the discussion we will have at the end of the symposium.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dominiek. You give a very nice overview of all the factors involving in piglet rearing and influencing the results. Also for you, the question, because you spoke on diet composition, on type of feed, on water, on hygiene, on environment, temperature management. Is there one golden tip that you say, keep that in mind for the optimal raising of the piglets?
Well, as I mentioned also, all factors are important because most disease conditions, the ones that we have discussed now, but also other disease conditions in sows or in fattening pigs, most of them are multifactorial, meaning it's always an interplay between pathogens on one hand and environmental conditions, stockmanship on the other hand. However, here for the young piglets, it's mainly intestinal disease. It's also the same in calves or in other young animals. So intestinal problems are more prevalent in young animals, respiratory disease more in older animals. So for the intestinal health, nutrition is very important and should receive a lot of attention pre-weaning, but definitely also in the immediate post-weaning phase.
Yeah, so you say a good health is the basis. And yeah, you can influence it with different factors. Thanks, Dominiek. Yeah, we will come back to the Q&A. So when you have questions for Dominiek, can be in English, can be in Spanish, do it by chat, and we will pick them up during the Q&A at the end of this conference. So before we have a new break, we have the last poll. And the last poll is, what, in your opinion, is the most interesting economic benefit of achieving 1 kilogram of extra weight at the end of nursery? So what is the most interesting economic benefit of 1 kilogram extra weight at the end of nursery? Is it 1, an extra 2 or 3 kilogram of slaughter weight? 2, 3 to 4 days earlier to slaughter? 3, more meat produced per square meter? 4, better feed efficiency? So extra 2 to 3 kilogram, 3 to 4 days earlier at slaughter, more meat per square meter, or the better feed efficiency. So take your time, because now we have a short break and we will come back within 10 minutes to you. And we are back to the last part of the conference. And the last part is on innovation inspired by LifeStart Swine research. And the speaker is Ruben, Dr. Ruben Decaluwe from Belgium. And Ruben is the Global Technical Manager Swine Young Animal Feed in Trouw Nutrition. So Ruben, very welcome. But before we go to your presentation, let's have a look at the last poll question. And the last poll question was, what was the most interesting benefit of achieving 1 kilogram extra weight at the end of nursery? 33% said an extra 2 to 3 kilogram slaughter weight, 29% 3 to 4 days earlier to slaughter, 14% said more meat per square meter, and 23% the better feed efficiency. Ruben, can you reflect on the outcome and what would be your answer?
Yes, well, the feed efficiency, and that was in the other session as well, is not something that I would mention, because if we look to the weight at the end of nursery and feed efficiency, that's a very weak correlation between both of these. So it means that feed efficiency is much better to steer with efforts and solutions that you have during the grow finish phase rather than what you're doing during the early life. But all the other answers are actually more in line with what we see based on the data. So if you, and I will come back to that later, if you improve your weight, you can gain more weight, or you can gain the same weight in less amount of time. Depends on your point of view on business. And in the end, that all leads on more meat produced per square meter of farm. So that's mainly managed then by how you design your supply chain.
Okay, so there is not one specific answer. More are touching the right outcome. Yeah, thanks for the reflection, Ruben. And yeah, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you, Leo, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So if we talk about LifeStart, then it's essential that we define what do we mean with LifeStart. We define it as the complete period between conception and 6 weeks of life. What you can see right here. And this LifeStart then should impact or influence or promote performance of your piglets during later phases of life, so the rest of the nursery period and the growth finish. So the question, and that was actually also a little bit the poll question, what is this doing? What is the potential that we can reach? And what we have seen based on numerous data sets and trials is if we plot the value of weight at 6 weeks of age, that we see that 1 kilogram extra at 6 weeks of age can lead to 2.5 to 3.5 kilograms more market weight, or 3 to 4 days fewer to market. And if you want to put an economic number on it, then we see that it's approximately around 1 to 3 euro per extra kilogram you have at 6 weeks of age. Of course, this economic value depends highly on the pig and ingredient prices at that moment in time in your region. But what is quite clear is that investing in early life and optimizing your piglet quality at 6 weeks of age has quite some potential, not only in performance of the pig, but more important in profitability of the farmer. So then if we look a little bit more in detail, 6 weeks of life, it's a crucial point in a pig's life. But the LifeStart is from conception to 6 weeks of life, which means that a lot of things can happen during that period. And if we need to pinpoint 2 critical periods during this early life, these are typical transition periods, as Professor Maes also already explained. The transition periods around farrowing, which is the peripartal periods, and the transition periods around weaning. And there's a lot of challenges coming together there, becoming visible. It's not always the case that they are originating there, but at least they become very visible and tangible at these moments in time. And we need to find solutions for them so that the pig farmers, pig producers can maximize piglet quality at 6 weeks of life, and as such also optimize lifetime performance. And in our quest or in our search to find these solutions, we always keep in mind that solutions in the end need to lead to profitable pig production. They need to be user-friendly, and they need to fit within the context of production. It was already mentioned by the previous speakers that the world is changing continuously, and other frameworks, other contexts is occurring, like sustainability targets, like antimicrobial reduction, like trade controls. All these kind of things come into play, and we need to make sure that our solutions fit within this context and allow profitable production within this new world that we're living in. So today I will just highlight some of the innovations that we have on the two periods, and let's start with the peripartal periods. If you look to a piglet being born, one of the main traits or main parameters that we use to estimate the piglet quality is birth weight. And that was already mentioned by the 3 previous speakers as well. And actually, it's quite a good parameter because we see that 100 grams of extra birth weight leads to 200 grams of extra weaning weight. So every gram of extra birth weight that you can gain gives you more chance of total lifetime production. But of course, the world is more complex than that, and there are a lot of other parameters that also affect lifetime performance at moment of birth, rather than birth weight alone. If we look to piglets all having the same birth weights, and you look through their growth curves, so on the y-axis you see the body weight, and here you see the age from birth up until 10 weeks of age. So if you take piglets of the same birth weight and you look to their growth curves, you see that there can be quite some variation between the optimal and the suboptimal regions. Of course, what we want is that all our piglets are following the blue line, but most of the time that's not the case. And if you specifically look to the period during lactation in the farrowing units, there's already quite some deviation occurring. So what is causing this? How is this occurring? And more important, can we understand it and can we do something about it? Well, to help us with understanding that, you can use kind of roadmaps. And in the transition period of parturition, we call this the Sow peripartal syndrome, which was first described by Dr. Coles. And it just maps all the critical parameters or the main challenges that you can easily observe at farm level. So, of course, the health status of the farm is important, and the animal management around farrowing is very important, which was elaborated by the previous speakers already. And if we look specifically to the sow, there's a lot of things that can go wrong or can be suboptimal, actually. So we can have deviating body conditions, we can have sows facing constipation, slow parturition, early parturition, hypogalaxia, of course. We had Professor Farmer talking about that quite extensively already. But also at the piglet side, there's a lot that can happen, like low vitality, low birth weight, stillbirth. And if you start plotting all the links between these challenges that you can observe, here you see a simplified version of that. Actually, everything is linked to each other, which means that, for example, if you have problems with hypogalaxia, this can be induced by multiple reasons and by multiple pathways. And if you want to solve it, you need to find the real underlying cause in your specific case situation. What they have in common is that each one of these and each of these pathways lead in the end to production losses. So it can serve as a kind of roadmap, and we try to plot our solutions on these roadmaps. Let's look to some examples. If we start with a farm that's around farrowing is facing production losses, and if you start looking to some of the key challenges, it's very fluid. There's no one clear indicator of why these production losses are happening. So these farms are facing stillbirths, birth weight problems, vitality, milk producing problems. In the sows, they are having sows that don't eat. Some other sows are facing constipations, parturition problems. So actually everything is happening a little bit at the same time. And most of the time, this can be narrowed down to originating problems with deviating body conditions. And of course, a deviating body condition doesn't suddenly appear at moment of farrowing. This mostly has a history during the gestation period or even during the gilt period. Can be induced by feeding management or by health challenges that occur earlier in life. So everything comes together here, but it shows that a deviating body condition can have quite detrimental effects on your production levels, or can lead via various pathways to production levels. So managing this is key. And because our world and our farming level becomes so complex, if you want to maximize your production possibilities, it becomes almost impossible to just do it on gut feeling. So because of that, modeling systems were developed to actually steer the sow body condition to what it should be around moments of farrowing or at other moments during the reproduction cycle. Of course, And they don't only do that by having the right body condition, but they also can do that for specific genetics, for specific profitability aims, etc., etc. So a lot can be done in that way. Now that was quite a holistic example, of course. Let's look to a more specific one. So assume a farm which is facing production losses mainly due to stillbirths and low vitality piglets. This can be reduced to actually problems with slow parturition, at least in the case I want to show you. Now, if you think about stillbirths in piglets, that's actually quite a funny thing, because normally it should not happen. Already in 1990, it was shown that if you deliver piglets via cesarean sections, that 98% of fully matured piglets are actually potentially viable at birth. So they are ready to be born alive. However, if we look in practice, 5 to 10% of stillbirth rate, that's quite normal. That's nothing surprising. So there's quite a gap between what you can have as potential live-born and what we see in practice. So what is happening there? Well, one of the main reasons is asphyxia, suffocation. So piglets, they are still alive at the moment that farrowing starts, but they actually suffocate to death during the farrowing process. How you can see this, for example, is here the relation on the left side. You see the relation between the stillbirth rate and the birth order. And the later piglets are being born during the farrowing process, the higher their chances of being stillborn. You see from 10, 12, but especially in hyperprolific sows, the 13 plus piglets, almost 20% of these piglets are at risk of being stillborn. We can also bring this back to some blood parameters of these piglets at birth. So here you see the birth order, and what we see is the blood pH on the right side, the blood pH at moment of birth, so of the umbilical cord blood, and the lactate levels. Lactate, it's a consequence of anaerobic energy usage. So actually energy uses under suffocation issues. And what you see is that if birth order increases, you see that the blood pH goes down, the lactate levels increases. So these piglets become in a kind of acidosis, which is purely a result of oxygen deprivation or asphyxia. So these piglets suffocate to death. And if they don't suffocate to death, they will suffer from it for sure. Because if you look to the relation between the blood lactate levels at birth of live-born piglets and pre and post-weaning performance, you can look at this graph where we group piglets in 4 groups based on their blood lactate levels at moment of birth. So from very low, normal, perfectly normal birth process, up until piglets in the orange, which had very high lactate levels, which actually suffered a lot of asphyxia. So they were just not stillborn at moment of birth. And what you see if you look to the colostrum intake, the higher the lactate levels, the lower the colostrum intake will be, with all the consequences that follow, as Professor Farmer explained. Also, the weaning weight will be lower, but also daily gain post-weaning will be, especially in the orange group, significantly lower compared to the rest, which means that just pure the hours of the farrowing process do not only impact the being born alive or being stillborn, do not only impact the immediate neonatal period, but do even impact performance weeks and weeks later in the post-weaning period. So we need to prevent this. Most of the time it's management practices that occur, giving assistance, using oxytocin, replacement rates, all these kind of things. But that's very labor intensive, requires high quantity and quality of labor. So we thought, can't we do it more simple? That's why we investigated what is the pathogenesis behind it, etc. And we've developed a supplement that in the end can give you, if you have problems with stillbirth, 1 extra piglet per sow per year. What you see here is a meta-analysis of 9 trials done in 6 countries, all on farms having stillborn problems, so more than 7% of piglets being stillborn. On the 0, you see the control group. So these sows were not giving any supplement. And in the blue bars, you see the results of the sows which were giving the peripartal sow supplements. And on average, we are able to increase live-born piglets with 0.4, which of course in a total year leads to approximately 1 extra piglet per sow per year. And that's only looking to the stillbirth rate. That's not even looking to the higher vitality of piglets that make it out alive and their consequence performance levels. So that was very briefly just highlighting 2 potential solutions that you could use to solve issues that become visible around the farrowing periods. And let's now look to the next period, the next critical period, which is the weaning period. Well, again, here, the starting weight of the piglets, that's quite a good predictor of the future performance of these piglets. If we plot the weaning weight to the weight at 10 weeks of age, we see that for extra 100 gram extra weaning weight, you will get approximately 175 grams extra weight at 10 weeks of age. But again, as always, and was the same for birth weight, other parameters also have their play. If we take piglets from the same weaning weight, you see again that the eventual growth curve can be quite different. And if you look more into detail here, the main difference is being made in the first 2 weeks post-weaning. So how is this coming? What is causing this? And can we find solutions for that? Well, again, you can use a roadmap, and in this case, we call it a piglet peri-weaning syndrome, where again, animal management, so the moving, the climate, the feeding management is crucial, of course, but also the health status of the piglets, but also the health status of your farm is quite important. And then if you look to the piglets itself, there's a lot of challenges that can happen: low weaning weight, a lot of weaning stress, growth retardation, problems with water and feed intake, diseases like, for example, diarrhea, but other diseases also occur, of course. You can have problems with mortality, treatment, low feed efficiency, etc., etc. In the end, what happens if you start plotting all of them together, you see that everything is linked to each other again. So if you have problems with high treatments, it can be caused by multiple reasons. We need to find the underlying cause to solve the problem of high treatments in this case. What they have in common, again, is that they all lead to production and as such profitability losses. So let's look again at some examples. Production losses, for example, caused by growth retardation, treatments, mortality, which can be linked back to problems with diseases and diarrhea. Underlying causes can be multiple, again, but for this example, we look to diseases and diarrhea. And as Professor Maes also mentions, especially in Europe, but actually everywhere in the world, this will become more and more a problem in the near future because our use of heavy metals, of antibiotics in feed needs to be reduced because of numerous reasons, which of course means that our golden powder to solve everything that actually we are doing wrong can be covered up. So this goes away. This will increase the risk for disease development, which means we need to find solutions for that. The context is changing, so we also need to adapt our solutions and our way of working. And because of that, we developed quite some nutritional technologies or nutritional innovations that if we put them together, they form a feeding program. And we did that to support gut health. And what you see here is a meta-analysis of 3 trials in 3 countries, a little bit more than 5,000 pigs. And all these farms were facing gut health challenges, which means they were losing performance or they were having real clinical challenges because of all kinds of pathogens. Now, we have a positive control, which is a typical commercial diet using heavy metals or antibiotics. A negative control, same diet, but just taking the heavy metals or antibiotics out. And then we have the milk-wean group, which is the combination of nutritional technologies that we developed. If we first look to the difference between the positive and the negative control group, you see that there is no statistic, but a minor numerical difference in mortality where the positive control is a little bit higher, but you see it's quite high because there was quite some challenge on these farms, of course. In the treatment side, there's a significant effect where if you already medicate in feed, you will need to medicate less individual treatments of your piglets, whereas in a control group, this will increase. So just leaving the antibiotics or the heavy metals out in these situations, it doesn't seem that good of idea. If we look to our nutritional innovations, we were actually able to, at least numerically, but also statistically, reduce percentage of mortality and reduce the percentage of animal treatments on these farms. So we are able, with our nutritional innovations, to support the gut health, but more importantly, we are also able to do that without compromising performance and profitability. What you see here is the three same trials with the positive control just put at 100%, and the negative control is being plotted in the blue bars. And if you would just take out the heavy metals and the antibiotics, that's what's being shown here, you see that your performance is dropping, your performance is going down in the nursery phase, and as such, also you have a higher risk of low performance in your growth finish. And you do that for higher costs. So feed cost per kilogram gain, but also total cost, which is your feed cost plus your mortality and treatment cost, is going significantly up. So again, just taking out the medication out of the feed in these health challenged farms, it's not that good of an idea. If we, on the contrary, plot our nutritional innovations next to that, you see that actually we are able to, on performance levels, do quite comparable with a positive control group and for quite comparable price. And if we look to the total cost per pig, we were actually significantly lower in this meta-analysis, which is caused by the feed cost, but also caused by the cost of mortality, because that was halved in these trials. So how do we do this? Because I'm talking on nutritional technologies and innovations. For this program, we grouped seven innovations or 7 fields where we innovated. We grouped them together. And for today, I would just like to highlight the functional additives, because on each of these pillars, I can talk for hours and hours, of course. But let's look to the functional additives. And if we talk on functional additives, we always try to approach it to apply feed additives based on the needs of the piglets, based on the needs of the consumers. And if you look to feed additives, they have multiple functions, from preventing bacterial intake to strengthening gut barrier function, stabilizing microbiota, and even immunomodulation. And each of these needs specific feed additives. So in the end, you need to combine your feed additive package within your piglet programs. So for today, I would just highlight the gut health modifier. There's much more to it, of course, but because of sake of time, I will focus on this one. And this gut health modifier, or this functional feed additive, was tested in piglets, where we took piglets pre-weaning, which is the yellow bar, and at weaning, we split them up in 2 groups. One group just got a commercial diet without the functional feed additive. That's the blue bar, the control group. The green bar, which was the treatment group, got the same diet, but just added with the functional feed additive. And what you see here on the left side is the total bacterial count in the unum pre-weaning compared to the post-weaning period. So what you see with the functional feed additive, the bacterial count stays the same as pre-weaning. If you don't use the functional feed additives, your bacterial loads in your small intestine will increase. And maybe even more important, this is the same study, but here we look to the number of observed bacterial species in the unum, so the diversity of the microbiota in the small intestine. And what you see is that in the control group, the diversity goes down. So the bacterial load goes up, but the diversity goes down, which means there's overgrowth of certain bacteria and a reduction or even exclusion of other bacterial species. So you get a complete disruption of the microbiota. Whereas if you use the functional feed additive, that is not happening. You keep the same bacterial load, and you keep the same number of species or the same microbial diversity. So we're able to stabilize the microbiota during the challenging weaning process in that way. Professor Maes also just mentioned that the villus height to crib depth ratio, it's quite essential and an essential parameter for gut morphology and gut health. And again, if we look here, we have a control group, so just basic commercial diets. an antimicrobial group, same diet with antibiotics, and a functional feed additive group, so the control group with the functional feed additive on top. And if we look to the villus height to crypt depth ratio in different parts of the small intestine, you see that the functional feed additive is having the same effects on the gut morphology as antimicrobials. So the villus height to crypt depth ratio is much higher, which is always an indication of a more healthy gut environment. The mode of action is different, but the end result is the same. So gut microbiota, gut morphology, that sounds all very fancy and scientific, but does it also mean something for practice? Well, it does, because if we look to meta-analysis of this functional feed additive, 14 trials in 5 countries done on 3 continents, you can see them here. We see that we have significant improvements of approximately 6% compared to control groups in daily gain, and a significant improvement of approximately 3% in feed efficiency compared to control groups. So it doesn't only do the scientific thing, it also shows in practical and profitability parameters. So that was under gut health challenged conditions. What if there's no gut health challenge? Then what happens? Well, the goal stays the same. We want to maximize early life performance and profitability, but now the challenges have changed. So we adapt and we select different nutritional technologies. And under that situation, you could see production losses, for example, caused by growth retardation, heterogeneity, and low feed efficiency. Well, we developed an innovation package or different nutritional technologies to cover that. And what you see here is a meta-analysis, 6 trials done in 2 countries compared to 9 benchmarks. More than 270,000 piglets were involved. The benchmarks are being put at 0%, and the bars show the relative difference of our nutritional technologies compared to these 9 benchmarks. And what you see is that we get a significant improvements in final weight and feed efficiency of approximately 5%, whereas our overall cost and feed cost per kilogram gain drops with approximately 10% compared to the benchmarks. So we get more performance in early life for a lower cost, and more performance in early life also means more total lifetime performance. How do we do that? Again, with the multiple nutritional technologies, you can see them here. So these are actually the bottlenecks of profitable and efficient production. But for today, I would just want to highlight very shortly the protein part. And for the protein part, we use something that was developed by Trouw Nutrition that is called Kinetio. And Kinetio is a tool that can be used to turn the knowledge of digestion kinetics into nutritional technology, so that we can use them into practical formulation. And if we look to nutritional evaluation through time, previously we just had the crude analysis or the wet chemistry analysis where we had crude protein and crude fiber. That's already a very long time ago. A few decades ago, we started to look to ileal digestibility of specific parts of the feed. For example, you see here ileal digestibility of proteins in different protein sources. So in that way, we take into account the degradation, but we don't take into account the time. So how much time do piglets need to reach a certain level of digestibility, of protein digestibility? And that's exactly what we do at Kinetio. We add the factor of time to the algorithms of nutritional evaluation. We did that so far for over 200 ingredients, and it showed us that we can use this technology to not only steer on performance and efficiency, but actually also on gut health support. What I want to show you is just one trial done at our Canadian facilities, one trial that is being steered for performance and efficiency. So we compared in our control group a high quality performance-driven diet without using Kinetio technology compared to our treatments diet where we use the Kinetio technology, which is just a new way of nutritional formulation. And what we see is that on daily gain and on feed efficiency, we make significant improvements there, whereas on the same time, we make significant improvements on the profitability parameters as well. So to conclude, early life is important. What you do between conception and 6 weeks of age can determine or impact your total lifetime performance in different ways. And there are two critical periods, or at least where the challenges become very important: peripartal periods and the peri-weaning periods. These are very complex, and if you want to optimize your performance in these areas, it's essential, or it's crucial, that you need to identify the underlying need and challenge and then also match the solution. Our Trouw nutrition representatives in fields, they can help you with that. And in their toolbox, they actually have 4 portfolios available that can be used separately, can be combined. The Gestawean, the Nutriop, the Milkwean, and the Celco portfolio are available to help you in your challenges. So thank you very much, and happy to see you at the round table.
Yeah, thanks, Ruben, for the very nice overview you gave, and the periods of attention around farrowing, around weaning, and yeah, you came up with results also in meta-analysis in several countries on different continents. So there are big opportunities. Also for you, the question, when you, I would ask you, can you give one golden advice for our attendants? What would be your answer?
Teamwork. That's the answer. Teamwork. Life has become, and pig farming has become so complex that you cannot rely on one single person. So make sure, as a farmer, that you advise yourself with veterinarians, with nutritionists, with people from genetic companies, with farm consultants, climate specialists. Yep. And one golden tip there, put them together around the table, because if you consult all of them separately, they will all give separate advices. So put them together and make a plan for your farm. Yeah, yeah. So you say it is all together because production is increasing. We need more know-how. We need the right approach. There is not one approach for everyone. So work together and ask people for advice. Okay, exactly. Great. Thanks, Ruben. Please stay online. It's now time for the roundtable discussion. So welcome back, Chantal Farmer and Dominiek Maes. So we have Chantal from Canada and Dominiek and Ruben from Belgium, the last 3 presenters. And yeah, we hope that John Pluske has a well-deserved rest and is sleeping in Australia. Let's see, we have a lot of questions. Chantal, yeah, the first question is for you. Yeah, we continue to aim for sow prolificacy effectively, but is it not defeating due to colostrum insufficiency? Do you think, is there an optimal litter size?
The answer is yes. In a way, we are defeating our purpose. But then I cannot say that there's a maximum litter size that we need to get to. I mean, I think we cannot go backward. So we have to stay where we are. But we have to make sure that with what we have, we manage to get as much colostrum produced by the sow. So I tell genetic companies, please stop selecting to increase litter size. We're fine now. We're fine. Yeah. Let's start selecting in terms of milking capacity, which should also include colostrum capacity. So we have a lot of work to do, and we should stop working on increasing litter size, indeed. Yep,
yep. Okay, so you say where we are now is fine, let's optimize it further. Okay. There's a question also for Dominiek. Dominiek, the question here is, what is the most likely reason for early scouring in neonates? So 3 to 5 days postpartum. So the diary, the scouring in the neonates early after farrowing, 3 to 5 days postpartum.
So neonatal mortality, most likely or most common cause is E. coli infection. We know that already, but we have commercial vaccines against that, at least in most countries. So the sows can be vaccinated to protect the piglets. But of course, the vaccination should be part of a general control program in which also attention is paid to the hygiene of the facilities, the colostrum intake of the sows, the housing conditions, so that it's dry, that's sufficiently warm for the piglets. That's one thing. Another possibility is also Clostridium infections. Clostridium type C can also be a cause of neonatal mortality, but then it's more bloody diarrhea. Actually, it's also possible that, and we have seen there are some publications on that, on the new neonatal piglet diarrhea syndrome. It's a problem that has been discovered first or reported first in I think in Denmark or Sweden or the Scandinavian countries. We have also reported in Belgium. No specific pathogen is found. So it's difficult to control that. We see it mainly in highly prolific sows. In Denmark, they have shown that by increasing hygiene, but also by reducing a little bit the protein levels of the sows during gestation, that may decrease the problems. However, if the cause is not known, it's difficult to implement specific control measures.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you talk about pathogens, E. coli is by far the number one. Especially then in gilts and primiparous sows, because the immunity in these sows is not yet optimal or the same as in older sows.
Yeah, okay, great. Thanks, Dominique. Another question from the audience, and this is for Ruben. It's more, what is quinaceo? Is it a vegetable? Is it a grain? Is it a product? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more about the quinaceo. Ruben.
Yeah, it's not something tangible. You can't take it in your hands. It's a nutritional evaluation tool. Like you have crude protein, like you have crude fiber or acid-lysine of a specific ingredient. You also have quinaceo. And quinaceo is, what we do with quinaceo is we calculate the digestion kinetics. So how much minutes does a piglet need to digest the protein of a specific protein source? Or how much minutes does it need to ferment the fiber of a specific fiber source? And by taking that specific timing into account in our formulations, we can steer on very easy and fast digestible protein sources, very fast fermentable or slow fermentable fiber sources. So it's just putting digestion kinetics into practice. That's what it is.
Yeah. Another question came up from the audience, and that's for Chantal. Chantal, is there a protocol recommended for the use of oxytocin to increase colostrum production?
Well, the only thing I can tell you is what I found in my study, that if you inject one very high dose of oxytocin, which is 75 international units, and in that study, I'm happy that somebody asked a question, because in my study, I injected it on average 16 hours after the birth of the last piglet. However, I recommend to producers to inject it earlier than that, so maybe only 10 to 12 hours after birth of the last piglet, because you want to make sure that the colostrum can be absorbed by the piglet. You have gut closure of the piglets at about 24 hours after birth. So if you inject this super physiological amount of oxytocin too late, it won't do any good because it won't be absorbed by the piglet. So ideally, one injection of the high dose of oxytocin, 10 to 12 hours after birth of the last piglet, is the way to use oxytocin to increase the quality. But all this is based on my own study. All I know is that a lot of producers, an Irishman wrote to me last week, he's doing it with 1,000 sows. So I hope that within a year or so, we'll be able to have results from the field with more animals. But that's what I would recommend now.
Yeah. Okay, quite clear the time of using the oxytocin and the effect you showed us. Dominiek, I got a question here for you. What is your opinion about loose housing, where piglets can suckle from different sows? Do we want that or we don't want it? What is your opinion?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, you have different loose housing systems, and a system in which the piglets can move from one sow to another is one of these systems. As such, I think for the piglets, it might be good if they can move more freely, have more space, they have more interaction. So the problems of mixing after weaning might be less important anymore. However, there is also studies that has been suggested in some research that piglets may let us say put a pressure on more weaker piglets at the other, so that they can remove the piglets from the other. So from that point of view, I think further research is necessary on the suckling behavior there. In general terms, the loose housing systems, I'm quite critical, but then mainly in terms of piglet mortality. I know it has many beneficial effects because from a behavior point of view, you cannot be against loose housing systems for the sows. The nest building behavior is something basic. So from that point of view, I agree. However, if you see, or if in some studies it appears that the piglet mortality increases, well, this is also a welfare issue. And one can question, do we not replace one a problem with another one, or do we not solve the problem of welfare of the sows and replace it with the welfare problem for the piglets? So from that point of view, I think more research is needed. And in the end, I think it will remain more critical from a stockmanship point of view.
Okay, yeah, great. I think a clear answer. Another question comes in and is for Ruben. Ruben, is there any benefit to slow down the growth of the weaners, for example, from 4 to 11 weeks, and improving the gut health, and then speed up the growth rate in the growing phase from 11 to 22 weeks?
You don't even need to do it from 4 to 11 weeks. What we do in one of our approaches where we want to support gut health challenge is we slow the piglets down during the first 2 weeks post-weaning, which is the critical periods where the transition stress and all the pathologies can occur. Once you get them healthy through these first 2 weeks post-weaning, first 2 to 3 weeks post-weaning, depending on your weaning age, you see that they can take off. So no need to slow them down during the full nursery period. You will lose too much money, too much time, and too much performance. But what we do, and we see that clearly in the growth pods, if you have gut health challenge, slow them down during the first 2 to 3 weeks post-weaning by smart nutrition, by putting less protein in your diets, making sure that everything is well balanced. And then once they hit that 42 days of age, you can just put in the pedal and push on performance.
Mm-hmm. Also a question for Chantal. Chantal, we see that often you have stress on the farm. Stress can be in sows. Does that have an effect on the results for the sows, but also for the piglets? And what can we do?
What can we do is not so easy. What I can tell you, stress, yes, it does have a negative effect. It even have a potential role on the incidence also of intrauterine growth restricted piglets if the sow is too stressed in gestation. So basically, you want to make sure that you have an environment free of stress. There's nothing that you can feed the animal to get rid of the stress. So in terms of noise, in terms of manipulating the animals, handling of the animals, you have to make sure that you don't overdo it. You don't have too much noise. All I can say is you have to be aware that stress is negative, and you have to make sure that from an environment standpoint, you minimize it. From a nutritional standpoint, if other people have an answer, please let me know. But I don't know of anything that can be given to the animal in terms of feeding that will decrease its amount of stress. So we just have to be very careful in our management of the animals.
Yeah, I think this is a question, maybe for all of you, but maybe start with Dominiek. We focus very much on productivity, and it's all about efficiency, productivity. But often you see the society, the consumers, and the legislators, the regulators, they have other ideas on sustainability. And do we enough to show the drivers and address the drivers to consumers and regulators' decision? How can nutrition science helps with these questions?
That's indeed a good comment or a good question. And actually, I was also in a discussion of a meeting a few weeks ago, and then was also the question was put forward: is it okay if we consider our pigs as top sport? Or do we have normal animals that are not high performing, if you can state it in that way? Actually, from a health point of view, there is nothing wrong with the high producing animal. And I think we should explain that also for the environment, an efficient piglet or pigs or farms that produce in an efficient way are better for the environment. With a lower input of nutrients, we can achieve more valuable proteins, more valuable high quality food. So from that point of view, intensive production as such is not bad from a health point of view. But I know that, if for persons that are not familiar with pig production, high production, intensive production, these are words that already have a negative connotation, so it's difficult to explain. But as such, I think our farmers, if they strive to have a high productivity, there is nothing wrong with that, as long as they take care for the animal, they feed according to physiological needs, if the housing conditions are appropriate and all that stuff, so that should be fine. If you look at nature, I think animals, pigs in nature, they undergo a lot of stressors and sometimes very huge stressors. So it's all about what is your comparison. Do you compare it with the ideal situation or not? That's the same if you look at, for instance, mortality levels. Well, we want zero mortality or we accept a normal level of mortality. Yeah. Also embryonic death. Pigs are known to have a high embryonic mortality. Also in wild animals, that is the case. So the comparison there is not zero mortality, but it should be something reasonable, acceptable, and under the present conditions. Yeah. And I think I will conclude in my response is that's also important that we need to feed the world. So 3 decades ago, maybe we were only with 2 or 3 billion people. Now we are with 9 billion. So we still have to feed these animals. And many people are becoming middle class and also want to have high quality proteins. So from that point of view, there will be a pressure for a high quality feed, and our pig production can contribute to that, but possibly also extensive systems or maybe artificial meat and all that, these areas may also take a part of the market. But I think intensive production also to have food security, the certainty that we will be able to provide quality feed to humans or will remain important.
Yeah, thanks, Dominiek. I think you're right. If I see the latest studies done in Wageningen University, they show that for an optimal use of all the resources in the world, 1/3 of our protein consumption should be animal protein because they valorize the co-products. And when fish is included, it is even more. It's up to 40%. And the data from FAO shows that 86% of the feedstuffs we use in animal nutrition is not used by humans. Of course, we should go maybe to 100%, but that means that animals play an important role. Ruben, question for you. You spoke about innovations. When will the innovations inspired by LifeStart Science be introduced in the market?
Oh, the ones I mentioned are already available in the market, or at least in part of the markets. It's because of registration and supply chain things that need to be solved. So that just takes time. But all the innovations that I mentioned are already there. And of course, in the background, we're working on more innovations and more technological and scientific developments in the field that will come out in the future. But the ones that I mentioned today, these are already available. So if people have specific questions on that, I suggest to get in contact with your local representative of Trouw Nutrition, and he or she can help you further.
Okay, great. When I go to the last question before we finish, is one also for Dominiek. Dominiek, can you train the immune system, for example, by nutrition?
Good question, important question, and I think nutrition plays a very important role in immune responses, in inflammation, and in how the animal handles, let us say, microbial burdens from the environment. So from that point of view, I think nutrition is important in every phase, for nutrition of the sow and for our newborn piglets, but also for the suckling piglets and the piglets after weaning. And with nutrition, it's important that for especially the innate immune system, because immune system, you have the adaptive immune system against specific pathogens, and that is not present at birth, but that is acquired, and that improves with age and contact with the pathogens. But for the innate immune responses and the robustness, let us say, against general pathogens or environmental pathogens, I think nutrition plays a very important role. However, it's a complex issue, and also innate immunity and adaptive immunity are not two separate things as they were for a long time considered. But recent studies have also shown that innate immune responses may influence actually adaptive immune responses. And we see also that with many disease conditions, even like with COVID now, the response of the animal upon infection is part of the pathogenesis, is part of the disease. So we want an inflammation or an inflammatory response or an immune response, but not in a to say, a way that it is not exaggerated, so that it is not harmful to the animal. So modulation of the immune responses and inflammation is definitely very important, and I'm pretty sure that further research will show the importance of nutrition and smart feeding of animals. So from that point of view, we have a little bit an advantage working with pigs or with chickens compared to human medicine, because we can standardize a lot of other conditions that may also influence immunity. And of course, it's much more difficult with humans. But with animals, actually, we can also detect minor differences or influences. And in immune responses, sometimes minor differences may have a huge impact on the outcome. So more is not always better in immune responses or immunity. So modulation of the responses is the key.
Great, thank you, Dominiek. So this brings us to the end of the online conference. I think we have had 3 excellent presentations, and we have seen that animal nutrition play an important role. If you talk about health, you talk about survival, you talk about quality, performance, profitability, nutrition is extremely important. And there are opportunities. So on the short term, improve piglet performance, but also it has an effect on the long term. And therefore, the slogan LifeStart sets life performance was again today in all the presentations clear present. I would like to thank the speakers, and now here Chantal, Ruben and Dominiek. It was great to have you here, and also John, of course, but he is no longer now with us. But yeah, it was great, and also I think we had very good questions from the audience. And if the audience want to know more, let them have contact with the Trouw Nutrition representatives in their country. And the questions who could not be answered because of the time, you will get the answer later on this week. I also like you all for the participation. I wish you all the best, and you or your colleagues can watch the presentations again online. So if you say I want to see it again, or I advise others to see it, please do it. Thank you very much for participation, and I wish you all a good rest of the day. Thank you.